We're live.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Justin Oliver, and I'm the chair of the Northern Regional Advisory Council. And I'd like to welcome you this evening to the Northern Region Advisory Council meeting on May 12th, 2021. Due to the continued presence of COVID-19 in Utah and associated with the public health and safety risks, large public gatherings are still strongly discouraged by the CDC and many local health departments. Based on the risks and recommendations, the Division of Wildlife and the chairs of this public body have determined that the Regional Advisory Council and Wildlife Board meetings will continue in a purely electronic format for the time being. Anyone wishing to comment on agenda topics in future meetings or to observe this meeting may do so by logging in on the Division's webpage at wildlife.utah.gov, where instructions and links are provided. Hopefully, we don't know for sure, but hopefully we're coming to the end. I hope soon, and there's an agenda item that talks a little bit more about our meetings, but hopefully here soon we'll be able to once again meet live as cases continue to go down. I want to start by conducting the roll call for the record, and I'll begin with Paul Chase.
Here.
Junior Goring.
Here.
Christopher Hogstrom.
Here.
Randy Hutchinson.
Here.
Aaron Johnson.
Here.
Matt Clark.
Here.
Mike Lauder.
Here.
Kevin McLeod.
Here.
Darren Perry.
Here.
Kristen Purdy.
Here.
And Casey Snyder.
Here.
Thank you. Those excused, we asked to be excused, were Ryan Brown, David Earl, and Emily Jansko. So thank you, everyone, for attending and being here. I also want to recognize that we're joined by a number of DWR personnel who are participating live this evening, including Blair Stringham, our Migratory Game Bird Program Coordinator, Kyle Maynard, Assistant Attorney General, John Neill, who is the Great Salt Lake Ecosystem Program Biologist, Pam Kramer, who is the Habitat Manager, Jody Anderson, who's the Northern Region Outreach Specialist, Ben Nadowski, Northern Region Supervisor, and Wyatt Bubak, who is the Captain. And finally, and most importantly, I'd like to welcome the public who are tuning into this event by watching a live broadcast on YouTube. In preparation for this meeting, the DWR posted each of tonight's presentations online, and the public was able to view those presentations and submit their written comments for each of those items. Due to the sheer volume of comments we received, we will not be able to read those comments into the record. We will do our best to summarize those public comments for you this evening, and all those comments have been sent to RAC members in their entirety for their review and consideration. We won't be able to accommodate additional public comments during tonight's meeting, but the RAC members are welcome to address the specific concerns they received from the public or outlined in written comments that we all received. The process will go as followed. We'll adhere to the following format. I will announce the agenda item. We will not listen to the presentation by the DWR personnel tonight. All RAC members have been asked to view the recorded presentations online prior to this meeting. The regional supervisor will then summarize the public comments received for that agenda item. I will then call for questions from the RAC members on the agenda item. After questions, I will call for RAC discussion, including any clarification or additional information RAC members may request from the division staff. Ben Nadowski, the Northern Region Supervisor, will help me keep track of your input and concerns. We will be sure to revisit each of them for discussion and actions. And we will repeat this process until we've addressed everyone's feedback. We will repeat this process for each of tonight's agenda items. I'd like to get started by our first item, and that is B for the approval of the minutes. I want to do both together, the agenda, today's agenda, and the minutes from last meeting. Does anyone have any questions or any concerns about that? And if not, if they'd make a motion to accept them.
Matt Clara had motion that we accept both the agenda and the minutes for today's meeting.
Okay.
I'll second that.
All right. Who did the second come from? I just missed that.
Randy.
From Randy. Okay. So we have a motion to accept the agenda and the minutes, and a second by Randy. Any questions before I call for a vote? So I'll now call for a vote to accept those. Paul Chase,
Yes.
Junior Goring,
Yes.
Christopher Hogstrom,
Yes.
Randy Hutchinson,
Yes.
Aaron Johnson,
Yes.
Matt Clar,
Yeah.
Mike Lauder,
Yes.
Kevin McLeod,
Yes.
Darren Perry,
Yes.
Kristen Purdy,
Yes.
and Casey Snyder. Did you hear that?
We just
Casey?
lost Casey.
We lost Casey?
Yes.
Okay, there he is. We got a yes. All right. At this point, I'm going to ask that Ben, he's better at summarizing the Wildlife Board meeting. It was quite the event. There's a lot of proposals and a lot of things out there, motions made. I'd like Ben to give us a recap of how the meeting went.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yep, pretty busy meeting. Lot of action items. So after approving the agenda and the minutes, there was a motion to approve a 600 permit decrease on the Manti unit and keep the San Juan Abajo unit permits the same as in 2020. That motion passed unanimously. The next motion was to accept the remainder of the division's recommendations as presented, which passed unanimously that's for the buck deer. Next motion was to track the division's progress of the 2023 draw application date changes with an update to the Wildlife Board in 1 year. That item was to be placed on the action log. That also passed unanimously. Next motion was to direct the division to place a list of allocated permits by unit on the division's website. Again, that action was to be placed on the action log and also passed unanimously. Some of that discussion was related. I think we had a little bit of discussion in our RAC meeting about the timing of the application process and the determination or allocation of permits. So that's where those last two motions were based on. The next motion was to accept the division's recommendations as presented with the addition of one permit on the Little Creek unit. This is for the bull elk and the buck pronghorn permit recommendations. That motion passed unanimously. For the once in a lifetime recommendations, the motion was to have hunters who have drawn a tag or are required to take a hunter orientation on shot placement of bison prior to receiving their tag. There was quite a bit of discussion on this, so it gets a little bit confusing on the motions, but that motion was later pulled or retracted, and in favor of that, there was a motion that all 2021 bison hunters receive information on shot placement and anything additional the division would like to include. And in 2022, there will be a quick mandatory orientation course for all bison hunters. That motion passed unanimously. So a little bit of a discussion about the logistics of making an orientation course happen, and later landed on that final motion. The next motion was to increase archery hunters choice permits on the Henry Mountain unit from 4 to 6. This would be for bison. That motion passed unanimously. Still on the once in a lifetime, the motion was to accept the remainder of the division's once in a lifetime permit recommendations as presented, and that passed unanimously. The next motion was to, hold on a second. Okay, so moving into the antlerless, sorry, a lot of motions in this meeting. Moving into the antlerless recommendations, the motion was to accept the division's recommendations as presented, which passed unanimously. For the CWMU antlerless permit recommendations, the motion was to accept the division's CWMU antlerless permit recommendations as presented. That motion passed with 4 in favor and 2 recused. For the conservation permit rule amendments, the motion was to accept the permit rule amendments as presented, and that passed unanimous. For the Weber Florence Creek CWMU permit request, the motion was to approve the permit request for Weber Florence CWMU as presented, and that passed unanimous. For the aquatic invasive species rule amendments related to the use of a dip tank, the motion was to approve the AIS amendments as presented, and that passed unanimously. The board also considered a permit variance request for Clint Heber, and the motion was to deny the variance request by Mr. Heber, and that passed 5-1. The board also subsequently considered a stipulation request by Mr. Eric Richens. Motion was to accept the stipulation from Mr. Richens as presented, and that passed unanimously. And that is it for the summary motions. Quite a few, sorry.
Thank you, Ben. I appreciate it. There were so many of them that get the verbiage on them gets me every time. So I appreciate you reading those for me.
I do my best.
So thank you. Is there any questions about anything that took place during the wildlife board that maybe you didn't have an opportunity to see, or any clarification?
Yeah, just a quick question, Ben. I was not able to sit in on the meeting. I was out of town. What was that last stipulation that passed?
Actually wasn't able to watch that one. I think Hanson, Greg, you're on the call.
Yeah, sure.
Can you help me out on that one?
Yep, Greg Hansen with the Utah AG's office. So that particular agenda item was a license suspension action that was before the Wildlife Board on appeal. A stipulation is another term we use for kind of a settlement, and we present a modified suspension period to the Wildlife Board for their consideration. The board approved that reduced suspension period, and so we enter that into the Interstate Wildlife Biological Compact as a final resolution of his hunting privileges.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right. We'll now go back to Ben for the regional update.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. For the aquatic section, kokanee salmon have been stocked into Rockport Reservoir for the second time. Lost Creek Reservoir will follow here shortly for the second time. Rockport gets 24,000 fish and Lost Creek gets 12,000 fish. So those are in addition to East Canyon getting its third round of stocking. So a lot of demand for kokanee fisheries in the state by anglers, and that demand just continues to surge. So we're trying to provide for that demand, and that's an awesome opportunity for anglers. Recently, we were able to put 20,000 fingerlings of tiger muskie into Pineview Reservoir. Those will grow quickly and should help bolster that fishery as well. I think in our last meeting, I updated you guys on our walleye spawn that the regional fisheries crew does. We collect walleye from Willard Bay, spawn those fish, and take those eggs and melt off-site to hatch them into fry. And we use those for various statewide needs, including putting them back into a good portion of them back into Willard Bay. So as a result of that, we put 1.7 million walleye fry into Willard Bay. And we recently been partnering with with Syracuse City on some improvements to the shoreline at Jensen Pond. That's been a really big effort for our fisheries crew, but a huge help from Syracuse City on shoring up the shoreline, improving habitat conditions and access conditions for anglers. Obviously tonight we're here to talk about waterfowl issues, so I got a good report from our waterfowl folks to share with you. Since we last talked, we've done a large-scale carp treatment using rotenone, which is used to remove carp from our systems. This was done at Farmington Bay, and that should help improve pondweed and waterfowl forage across 3 of the units there at Farmington Bay. Also in the past report, I updated you guys on 2,000 acres of frag that we treated aerially, and about 4,700 acres from the ground using herbicides. We've also mowed an additional 500 acres since then at Farmington Bay, Ogden Bay, and Howard Slough. And we're working with Forestry, Fire, State Lands, and USU and working on some reseeding following treatment. So for the upcoming frag treatment cycle, we've been partnering with Forestry, Fire, State Lands, Fish and Wildlife Service, and Cache and Box Elder counties on a goal to treat 10,000 acres of frag. Hopefully we can meet that goal, but obviously we've got some drought conditions that could change things here in a little while, and I'll get more to drought here shortly. We also planted 400 shrubs at Ogden Bay for upland game, and I think it's this weekend coming up. We'll be putting 300 shrubs in at Salt Creek to help with upland game there as well. And our waterfowl crew has been continuing their efforts to expand and improve the boat launching situation over at Willard Spur. In our wildlife section, we've been conducting bighorn sheep lambing surveys at Antelope Island, purchasing materials to build kind of radio telemetry towers for tracking migratory birds around the Great Salt Lake. That's been a really big effort. Our non-game biologist has also been working on what we just call the INBCR. It's an integrated monitoring and bird conservation regions surveys. It's a huge bird monitoring effort that takes place across the region, not just in Utah, but neighboring states as well, across a number of different partners to monitor 300 bird species. So we've been really busy with that. We've wrapped up the sage grouse and sharp-tail count, let counts. Obviously, we're looking at a long, hot, and dry summer ahead, so we're kind of preparing for that. In the last meeting, we addressed our big game recommendations, which we incorporated drought into those recommendations. But coming up, we're sort of bracing for a rather difficult season. Our aquatic section is looking at a lot of our fisheries. We'll be monitoring conservation pools and conservation flows in our streams. We're already looking at our stocking philosophy and our strategies there to make sure that we can maximize stocking opportunities where needed, but also make sure that we don't stock where they're not necessary given water conditions. Our habitat section is preparing for probably a pretty hard fire season. We were able to build 3 new guzzlers for upland game, but also our habitat section has been really busy actually filling guzzlers. We've got a lot of guzzlers that are just bone dry and empty, and we've had a lot of help from the Wild Sheep Foundation and working on putting water in those guzzlers, so we've got water for our wildlife to drink. It's going to be quite a year ahead. So okay, I'm sure you guys are paying attention to your credit cards and your applications. Our big game draw results are out, so if you haven't looked, go ahead and take a look at that. And Mr. Chair, just a few orders of business before we wrap up the report specific to the Regional Advisory Council. I just wanted to put in a plug and a huge thank you to the 3 outgoing members, Kristen Purdy, Chris Hoekstrom, and Aaron Johnson, for all of the hours that you guys have sacrificed in your free time to be here, not just tonight, but in years prior. Appreciate the service you guys have rendered for us. And Justin and I are working on a small token of appreciation for you guys. It's not enough to offset all the time that you've spent here and on behalf of the public, but just wanted to say thank you for everything you guys have brought to this process. Anything you want to add to that, Justin?
I would just second what you said. I'm grateful for, the everyone's participation, the friendships, and everyone, for our entire RAC, everyone comes from different walks of life or different experiences and different background, backgrounds, and it's great to have everyone's input. And I've appreciated, Chris and Aaron and Kristen for their input. The RAC, they've really helped make the process, successful, and we're just grateful for them. And we are looking at doing something for them. Normally, if we were in a meeting, at this time, there's a small token or gift that we would be giving, and we are looking at doing something like that. We just want to say, again, I'm thankful also for them.
Yeah, it's been a hard year, and it would have been really easy to check out, given the distance that we've all had to maintain, and appreciate that all three of you guys have stuck it out and kind of hung in there with us. But we'll be in touch soon. We've got details on our small token of appreciation. But and one last item of business, I'm not sure if Justin's excited about this part or not. I think he's kind of excited, but if there's anyone else out there who's interested in serving as chair, let us know. I've talked a lot to Justin about it. It's been a hard year for him to be the chair, and he's stepped up and done an excellent job, but I don't think there's any turf there protecting the role. But he's finally comfortable in the role too.
I'm happy to do it again, but I'm more than happy to let someone else have an opportunity. So I just don't want, if anyone wants her, they're not going to hurt my feelings at all. If someone,
we'll address that.
This job, it just kind of happened. I don't remember exactly how it took place, but anyway, yes.
He's threatened to quit a few times on me, but he hung in there, thankfully. We'll handle that when we get back to our in-person meetings whenever we can here shortly. But I haven't been here for the election of a new chair yet, but it sounds like you guys usually do that through a kind of a little ballot type of a process. So that wouldn't work out too well online. So we'll make sure to put that as kind of one of our first orders of business when we get back to work together in person. So just wanted to make that mention in case anybody's thinking about it, or if you haven't thought about it, maybe you'll start thinking about it. So that's all I've got, Mr. Chair, unless there's questions.
Yeah, do we have any questions from anyone about any of the items that he brought up local to our department?
This is Matt Clark. This is probably a while. You don't necessarily need to know the answer to this right now, but I'm just curious how the restoration is coming on the Coldwater Canyon Wildlife Management Area after it burned a couple of years ago. Like I said, I don't necessarily expect you to have an answer off the top of your head, but it is something I'm curious about.
That's a really specific one, which I definitely don't have. But we do have Pam Kramer and maybe even Scott Walker on the call. Scott or Pam, do you guys have any sense for that?
Yeah, Ben, I can address that. Matthew.
Awesome. Thanks.
This is one of our successes. It's really coming really well. We did a new, a little bit of technology and some new treatment effects where we postponed seeding that fall, and we did some chemical fallow where we chemically treated to try to get ahead of the weeds. It was a very weedy site, and we seeded the next fall, and we've had phenomenal success up there. This year, last summer was extremely dry, but it was the previous winter that we seeded, and it looks really great. And we'd almost hope that the rest of it burns so we can do the same thing. But at this point, Coldwater Canyon restoration is really coming along well.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Scott, along that line of thought, while we're there, can you give any type of update on Hannaford Echo?
On the work that we've been doing up there, the restoration work?
Yes.
Yeah, we've been scalping a lot there, and we've also included some work with pasture fencing and water distribution for cattle to distribute the grazing a little better. The area that's been treated, the first year it came well. We've had really good success with the scalper, as you maybe have seen some of those projects. This last year was a tough year to do restoration anywhere. So the work we did last year, last fall, the fall before, it was just a tough year, and it came really well in the spring, but a lot of it just dried off and burned up. So we'll continue to work up there. We've got another project this year that we're going to be doing more work on Hannaford Echo. But all in all, I'd say we're on the plus side of success. But over the last year that's been so dry, it's we might be not way on the plus side. But we're working on it, and I'm seeing some. I think we're really excited about the success we're seeing.
Thank you.
It's not very often we hear Scott talk that positively about success. He's a hard critic on restoration success. So when he says it's going well, he means it.
Ben, one quick question for you. I have a good feel for the shark tail counts and how they've gone. How about on the sage grouse?
I haven't heard the final numbers. I've been hearing some talk that maybe they're down a little bit in other regions, but I haven't gotten the lowdown on ours. Jim, have you had any hallway conversations with your staff on what that might look like?
Yep. So I just got an update from Avery Cook out of our Salt Lake office. Region-wide, we're down slightly, but with that, Box Elder is up slightly, and it was the Rich County side that was down compared to last year. But we still have some paper forms that could need to be entered. So we're just waiting for those final numbers. But, just region-wide, we'll probably be down just slightly compared to last year.
Okay, thank you.
I've been hearing really similar reports from other regions, but that's anecdotal, so don't hold us to that one. We'll have to see where it all shapes up. Thanks, Jim.
Do we have any other questions before we go into our next agenda item? It's our first action item of the night.
Okay, back to you, Mr. Chair. Thanks.
Right. Thank you. So agenda item number 5 is the House Bill 295 Waterfowl Rule Amendments. Hopefully everyone had the opportunity to watch Blair's presentation and to go over it. There were basically 5 recommendations. First was regulation to not allow guiding on waterfowl management areas. Another one was to create a permit process to allow guides to pass through those waterfowl management areas to access non-division lands. And then there was one to adding a Duchesne County and Uintah County hunt area for sandhill crane. And then defining dog use, shot types, and firearm use on Utah Lake Wetland Preserve. And then the last one would be prohibiting the construction of new blinds on waterfowl management areas. I believe those were the 5 main points. We've got Blair on here. I spoke with him prior to the meeting, and there's a few things that we've asked that he might share to maybe help tonight's decision, make it a little easier as we're coming up with, on motions for this proposal. So Blair, would you take a minute to share some of more of the feedback that you've got and some additional information that might help us?
Mr. Chair, before we are enlightened by Mr. Stringham, do you want to cover the public feedback real quick?
Yeah, that would be good. That'd be appropriate.
Okay. So just a quick change. We had a full summary all wrapped up for the feedback, and noticed that one respondent had accidentally put the feedback for the WMA issue into item number 2. And so these numbers I'm about to share with you are a little bit different than the summary we already sent out to RAC members, but it's been adjusted for that small correction. So rather than 44 total responses to this item, we had 45, 22.22% or 10 individuals strongly agreed with the recommendation of the division, 6 somewhat agreed or 13.33%. 0% were neither agree nor disagree. 1 was somewhat disagree or 12.22%, and 28 were strongly disagree or 62.22%. Obviously there's a lot of feedback on this item, particularly around the WMA and not allowing guides to operate within WMA's item. and the feedback was kind of related to opportunity and access on both sides of the discussion. So for those that were supportive of the recommendation, they liked it because it helped protect and provide opportunity and access for the public hunter. For those who were opposed to it, they were opposed because they felt that for the same reasons it got in the way of opportunity and access for the public hunter. So not necessarily for the guides, but for the clients of the guides. So a lot of back and forth, kind of both around that access and opportunity theme, but coming from two different perspectives. So hope that helps. Now I think we can go to Mr. Stringham, who's more impressive than I.
No.
Well, yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thanks for the opportunity to speak for a minute, Mr. Chair. Let me share my screen real quick and get this up. I've been getting a lot of questions just as you guys have, and so I feel like it'd probably help our discussion flow a little bit better if I maybe answered some of those up front. I think it'll give you some background information and context on everything so that you'll be able to, I guess, understand it better for your discussions you'll have tonight. So is everybody seeing that? Is that showing up? Okay.
Yes.
All right, so I wanted to give a little bit of background, I guess, just on what got us to this point. I think it'll help you kind of understand why we were doing this in the first place. The first thing to talk about is HB 295, and so that was legislation that passed in this 2021 legislative session, which essentially required guides to have a permit on our WMA. And so given the timeline between now and our waterfowl seasons that'll start in September, we needed to essentially have something in place, which would be a permit for guides to use the WMAs, depending on whatever that looks like when this process is over. And so I know a lot of people have been concerned that we're trying to push this through without public comment, and that certainly isn't the case. I mean, we realize that this is a really hot button issue for people. They want to comment on it, and so we've tried to maintain the process we've been doing this last year so people had the opportunity, but it certainly wasn't just to try to slide it through under the radar. It was simply just a timing issue for us to try to get it done before the waterfowl seasons start. Also, for some background information on guiding, it has been happening on our properties for many years now without any restrictions. It hasn't necessarily been something that is a sanctioned activity, but it also wasn't something we were actively trying to stop. It was just happening out there, and we really hadn't had much discussion on it prior to this proposal that you're seeing tonight. And so for some background information on the survey, first off, we have about 26,000 waterfowl hunters in the state. And so that's based on our 5-year average over the last 5 years. About 96.5% of those people are resident hunters, with about 3.5% of those being people coming in from out of state. And so we created a survey in April, and about 5,500 people participated in that survey, which would equate to about 20% of the waterfowl hunters in the state participating in that survey. It was a target audience. We were able to screen those people to see if they were hunting waterfowl. And so we used those responses to essentially present the data that you saw in our presentation. We had about 4,800 people respond to the guiding question. Some people skipped it. But looking at those responses, we tried to gauge, I guess, just how credible the survey was and how representative it was of our overall waterfowl public. And so the responses we've got were about 97.5% resident, 2.5% non-resident. So there was a little bit of discrepancy between those numbers, but for the most part, we feel like it represented the waterfowl community. It was a huge sample of people, and so we felt like that was a good representation of people's opinions on this issue. Also, I know there's been a lot of concern that we haven't been analyzing everybody's responses, and so we didn't pull the data until it was about 4 days worth of data that we presented to you guys for the RAC packet, simply because we working along our timelines to get that out. But we pulled new data as of 2 days ago. So if you participate in the survey before May 10th at 8:30 in the morning, your responses will be included in what I'm going to present now. And so all that stuff, it hasn't changed a whole lot. I mean, there's a little bit of tweaks, but you probably won't even recognize much difference. Those percentages stayed about the same. And so looking at the data, responding to the, if you're in favor of guiding or not guiding, the responses we gave to people to select from were essentially 5 different choices. And they started with strongly opposed, slightly opposed, neutral, slightly supportive, or strongly supportive. So we felt like this would kind of gauge where people were at and if they were on, one side or the other, or somewhere in the middle. The responses that we had for people who didn't want to see guiding were 46.4%, and those were our strongly opposed. Our next category was slightly opposed, that was 16.1%, a neutral 23.4%. And on the right side, you have the slightly supportive, that was 7.4% of people, and then strongly supportive was 6.6% of people. And so for the RAC presentation, we simply just lumped together the strongly and supportive groups for both one of those categories. And so for the no's, it came out to be 62.5%, and for the yeses, it was 14%. And then that chunk of people who were in the middle. One of the other things we're able to do is sort people by user groups. And so we thought it might be important to look at where people hunted, and that might change depending on the location people were at. And so we looked at people who hunted on WMAs, federal refuges, Great Salt Lake, private property, and duck clubs. What we found is you can look here on the left side of the graph, and as you move across, you have these same categories again. And so on the left side was strongly opposed. That lighter orange color is slightly opposed. The gray is neutral. Slightly supportive is the blue. And then the gray is strongly support. Again, amongst various people hunting various different areas of the state, the percentages were about the same, somewhere between that 40 to 50% range for strongly opposed, and then about 6 to 6.5% people strongly supported it. Non-residents were another category we looked at. I know a lot of people have had discussions about how this may impact non-resident hunters. And so we looked at their responses as well. And this was a little bit different. There was about 25.6% who strongly supported this, which is to be expected. I mean, a lot of people coming in from out of state probably are looking for guides to access and to hunt. And then we had the strongly support and was still fairly high. It was about 41%. And you've got those percentages in the middle. Another thing that we looked at was user days and where people were spending the majority of their time hunting. And so I guess I wanted to point out mostly that our WMAs are where about 56.3% of waterfowl user days happen in the state, which is a huge percentage of the waterfowl population or hunters using those properties. It goes down from there. You have private property at 15.5, federal refuges at 10%, duck clubs at 7.7, and so forth. But again, just point out that, regardless of whether you're guided or an unguided hunter, WMAs are critical. Another interesting thing with that is that 71% of people who hunt at least one day for waterfowl in the state are at least on a WMA at some point. So again, 7 out of 10 people are hunting on WMAs at some point, at some capacity, at least one day throughout the season. So again, they're pretty important. You compare that to some of the other properties we manage, our wildlife management areas around the state, and that's probably less than 3% of people hunt on those. So just kind of shows you that for waterfowl, these properties that we manage are really important for this hunter group. Looking at WMAs, this is another interesting graph just to kind of show you where a lot of our hunters are hunting at. Farmington Bay takes about 25% of the user days that occurs on our WMAs. Ogden Bay, about 19, Willard Spur, 12.8. Public Shooting Grounds 10.2, and Harold Crane about 8.7. Just those 5 WMAs alone consist of about 76.3% of waterfowl hunting days on WMAs. And it also tends to be the areas where guiding coincides as well. Part of that's because a lot of birds are there. But again, I guess it kind of leads back to our concern with just a lot of people in these areas and competing with each other and just being on top of each other. I compared some of the other states just to give you essentially a broader perspective on this and just Utah to see what other states are doing. There's several states in the flyway that don't allow guiding on WMAs. That's Washington, Idaho, and Montana. And included in that is all federal refuges. They don't allow guiding. There's also a group of states that do allow guiding with some level of exemptions. California allows guiding, but they take a large portion of money from the guides who hunt on their properties, and so it essentially becomes non-functional there. The percentage is so high that guides just aren't guiding in California. In Oregon, they do allow guiding, but no money transactions can occur on the property. Alaska allows you to, but you have to register with the state. And then there's a couple states that do allow guiding on WMAs, and that's Nevada and Wyoming. And so lastly, I had a few things I just wanted you to consider as we put this together, just some of the background information about why we kind of went in this direction. We realize this is a very polarizing issue, and we've had concerns about it for a while, but it was just something we didn't address until the HB 295 bill kind of forced us to do that. We do have our WMA managers on the line here. If you have a specific question about the WMAs and how guiding is happening on those, I'm sure they'd be happy to answer those questions as well. So keep that in mind. Before we move forward on any kind of recommendation, we wanted to get some background just to kind of take the pulse of the waterfowl community. We started by talking with our sportsmen's groups just to see what their interest was in guiding and how they felt about it. And most of the groups in the state were supportive of some kind of restrictions on guiding. We talked with our managers. Again, they had some concerns with guiding and have for some time now. And so they felt like it was warranted. And so at that point, we wanted to take a survey to the public, because if it wasn't supported by the public, we would continue to allow guiding. If it was something that they wanted to support a recommendation to not allow guiding, then that would be something we'd be interested in as well. So we took the survey to the public. We just showed you those results. And based on that, and we felt like a recommendation was warranted to not allow guiding on the WMAs. And we felt like that was what the majority of waterfowl hunters were interested in. So we felt like as a division managing wildlife for the public, then that was what we were going to do, because that's what the majority of people were interested in seeing. Keep in mind that we don't often hear from people if they support a recommendation as well. And so generally the people who comment on this are generally have more to lose than the people who are in support of it. And so again, we didn't see a lot of comments from the public compared to who participated in the survey, but keep that in mind as you move through it. And also keep in mind that this isn't just a prohibition on guiding across the state. Specifically on our WMAs, most of it's happening on our Great Salt Lake WMAs. They total a little over 100,000 acres, but we are allowed in guiding pretty much anywhere else. So Great Salt Lake bed, lots of property, lots of guides, public acts, they're tie up fields and things like that to guide on. All that's still allowed. It's specifically just not allowing guiding on the WMAs. So, Mr. Chair, I hope that's helpful for everybody, just to give them some context to where we are coming from, and I'm happy to answer any other questions that they have.
All right. Well, I hope with you and then our WMA managers on here, hopefully we can, have a lot of questions answered. We also have something unique on our RAC as well as the infamous House Bill 295. One of our RAC members is very involved with that as well, and he might be able to answer some questions with that as well. So with that, let's start with questions for the RAC that may have for Blair or anyone else. Do we have any people have any questions?
So I have a quick question, and this will be for Blair and or Casey, actually. So going through and reading House Bill 295, does it say guides need to have a permit? Suggesting that, hey, if you're guiding, you need to have a permit? Or is that permit suggestion just to get across the WMA? Does that make sense, Blair?
Yep. Yeah, it does. It's specific to, I guess, any activity that would occur on the WMAs. And Greg Hansen, do you want to speak to that one a little bit more in detail?
Yeah, sure. I can give it a shot. Greg Hansen, Utah AG's office. So HB 295 has a prohibition section that prohibits a commercial guide or outfitter from operating a guiding service on a waterfowl management area without an annual permit that's issued by the division. There's also a section that requires a series of rulemaking provisions from the division that deal with both preserving public opportunity on the WMA, as well as identifying which waterfowl management areas might fall under this the set of restrictions. So I guess I hope that initially answers your question, that it does have an outright prohibition without an annual permit, and then directs the division and the Wildlife Board to make rules on how that process would play out.
Okay. And then, so I'm going to follow up just for a second. Casey, if you don't mind, can I put you on the spot since you're so involved in this? What was the intent of the guide portion of this bill? Was the intent to prohibit guiding until or unless permits are given? What was the intent there?
I think it went through a variety of iterations. So HB 295 first draft actually had an outright prohibition. And then as the process went on, we basically landed at the need for a permit. I think the overall criticism on this bill, this bill, just so everybody's clear, was the trail cam bill, the baiting bill, and had this provision as the third component of it. But the overall criticism that I was getting was, you need to have a public process, you need to have public comment. You're on the RAC. How don't you know better that that's the way you should do these things? So the provisions on this space, the provisions related to trail cams were specifically punted to the RAC and the division to make those decisions based on public comment and feedback.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. So Blair's, well, I kind of have the floor. I'm just going to keep it for just a second. We've got, and I forget how the WMAs are broken down and how many managers. I think we have 5 managers. What is there a general consensus among the WMA managers on the on this aspect of it, on having guides active in the WMAs?
Yeah, so we had some internal meetings about it, kind of discussed the pros and cons of, allowing guiding, not allowing guiding, and the managers felt like there were enough issues that they would support a recommendation to not allow guiding. And in the specific issues, I mean, they are on the call if you'd like to hear about some of those. I know Rich and Chad are on the call, and they had some stuff that they could discuss with you if you're interested in hearing those.
Do you know, and this is me kind of speaking for everybody, so I apologize, but I would love to hear their specific impacts, because I want to say that they're the Ogden Bay and the Farmington Bay managers. Am I right on that?
Yeah, so Rich has all the ones generally in the Weber County area, so Howard Slough, Ogden Bay, Harold Crane, and Chad Crandy's on the north end, so public shooting now in Salt Creek. Yep.
I would love to hear their general thoughts on it.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, guys.
Yeah, thanks. Chad Cranny. I'm the manager of public shooting grounds, Salt Creek and Locomotive Springs, Waterfowl Management Areas. And basically, we're concerned with some of the hunting pressure that's going on some of these areas from guides. And we're also concerned with how much guiding and commercial hunting of waterfowl is increasing over the past few years.
By a concern or a concern with not with the general public getting to those areas?
I'm sorry.
Is it a social concern or a biological concern?
It's more of a social concern, yes.
Okay, I'm Rich Hansen. You want me to go, Chad?
Yeah, if you got anything to add?
Yeah, I'm Rich Hansen. Like Blair said, I manage Howard Slough, Ogden Bay, and Harold Crane Waterfowl Management Areas. And where we're on the ground, we get the complaints from the hunters that are upset. And I get complaints weekly from swan hunters, Harold Crane and at Ogden Bay, that they just can't compete with the guides. They can afford a few decoys and go out and maybe have a chance. But they say if the guide's there, then they don't stand a chance, because the guides are very good at what they do. They can afford to buy the equipment, and then they're just very experienced, and they're really successful. So I get those complaints, and I don't know if it's jealousy. I don't know if it's if it's legit, but I get enough complaints from enough different hunters to where I think it is an issue. Also, I get a lot of complaints from Willard Spur WMA as well. A lot of trips are made out there. I haven't seen it myself, but I get complaints that multiple trips are made each day. And then, our access is limited, our number of acres is limited, and we already have crowding. Waterfowl hunting is very popular, and there are just other complaints that we hear that, if we have guides out there competing with the general public, that that it isn't fair. But we're the guys on the ground, and we're hearing the complaints, and we're passing those on.
Thank you. I won't monopolize. Sure other people have questions.
I'd like to. I've spoken with Rich, but do we have any confirmed complaints? Has there been citations? Has there been any confirmation? I mean, is it all so-and-so told me this? Have you witnessed? Has there been any type of infraction? Has there been anything, has law enforcement got involved or any proof other than another hunter said that?
Chair, do we still have Captain Buback on the call? We also have our local lieutenant too that can help with the LE side. Captain, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. My camera wasn't working again. Apologize. So I'm Captain Wyatt Bubach, Division Wildlife Law Enforcement Section. I used to work in Davis and Weaver County. And again, Dave Beveridge is a current lieutenant there in the northern region and can probably speak to current issues. My experience in the past has been reports of potential over limits by guides. That stems largely from what Rich Hansen mentioned of guides taking multiple trips in and out of a certain boat launch. So for example, they'll take a set of clients out in the morning, harvest a limit of birds with those clients, go back and get another set of clients. And I've seen this off and on throughout my career in the region. So I know that part does occur. As far as confirmation on over limits being taken by the guides, I personally haven't experienced that or written any citations, and I'm not familiar with any being confirmed. But the reports we get on the law enforcement side of things is basically that potential over limit. Basically, one guide will stay out with the decoys while the other guide will go pick up more hunters, and then sitting in the same spot for a week ongoing, where they'll hunt the same exact hole or open pocket of ice or whatever it may be for a week. But as far as confirmed citations, I'm not aware of any. But we have had multiple complaints.
Do you have complaints about other hunters doing that besides just, I mean, is it not feasible that anyone could do that same thing? Go get a friend. I mean, they can't leave decoys out overnight, correct? You can't like camp out, leave your stuff there.
Yeah, you could camp out. You can't leave them unattended overnight. Okay. So if you actually wanted to camp, which you will see on opening day of the waterfowl hunt and even potentially on the youth waterfowl hunt, people will camp overnight with their decoys to save their spot. The difference between a public hunter is usually when they harvest their limit, they leave, and then that spot is now available for other public to come and hunt, where these guides do have a tendency at times to sit on the spot all day or multiple days in a row, depending on the bird usage there.
Are they licensed guides that are doing that? Would be another question that I have. Are they people who are licensed and legal guides that are doing what's being stated, you know?
Yeah, I'll touch on this lightly and then turn it over to Greg Hansen. But for example, DOPL, Department of Professional Licensing, regulates big game guides. However, they don't regulate waterfowl guides. So you have a variety of quote unquote guides for waterfowl. Some make enough money that they completely guide waterfowl hunting during the season, or at least to a large degree are able to make a decent amount of money doing that. And then you have others that would just advertise on KSL. So as far as licensed and quote unquote legal guides, that's not regulated by DOPL. I'll turn that over to Greg to answer more finally.
Yeah, Greg Hansen. I'm not sure I have a whole lot to add to Captain Bubak's explanation, other than that HB 295 and our recommended rule changes would make a lot of the same definitions and provisions that are in the Guides and Outfitters Registration Act applicable to waterfowl guiding in Utah. Specific to use of our WMAs, not across the board, specific to use of our identified waterfowl management areas.
Sorry, no, I'm asking a lot of questions. What about the state's parks? You know, now if I understand correctly, for a guide to put anyone in his boat, the second that he puts someone in an airboat or any type of boat, does he fall under the state parks rules where they all the recommendations that are there? You know, as far as having all of their logs and everything that's there.
Yeah, and that is one of the requirements that we've added in our rule recommendation for the permitting requirement on guides and outfitters transporting clients across WMAs, would be those state parks requirements.
Justin, it's Aaron. Can I jump in real quick and then you can continue asking questions?
Yeah, no, please. I'm done.
So is it my understanding that if you're guiding a small game animal, waterfowl, turkey, whatever, you don't have to have an outfitter's license or a guide's license?
Through DOPL, that is correct.
How do we fix that? Because part of the reason they have those licenses is liability, and there's probably no more hunt that's more dangerous than to get on one of them airboats and go out in the winter and hope it don't get stuck.
And so initially my response would be that those requirements are found in the Guides and Outfitters Registration Act. That's administered through DOPL and not something that the Division of Wildlife administers. This particular proposal and through HB 295, we were directed to consider some of those liability requirements and restrictions. We've implemented those in the proposed permit requirement for transporting clients across WMAs. But as far as small game and turkey and those other species that don't fall currently under the Guides and Outfitters Registration Act, we're not touching those with this current proposal.
All right. Sorry, Justin, you can go ahead. I'll save my questions till you're done.
No, I invite anyone to ask questions. That's what we're all here for. So
Justin, this is Chris. I have a question. This is in regards to outfitters possibly setting up at the same spot and staying there for a few days. Since you can't leave your decoy spreads out overnight, doesn't that give anybody a chance to get there first thing in the morning and take that spot, even if the outfitter had the plan that he was going to set up there, before dawn every day? I mean, I understand that if somebody sets out a spread before dawn and then sort of switches whoever's overseeing it in the middle of the day, and then somebody else finishes the evening hunt, maybe there's two people using the same decoy spread, but the decoy spread has got to come off that spot and it can't stay out overnight. So doesn't that give somebody else a chance to come into that spot at dawn the next day if it's a first come, first served basis? I guess my question is for Blair to answer.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And I appreciate your question. That is correct. It is the first come, first serve hunt in that spot. And so it is open to anybody. As soon as someone leaves that spot, it would be open to somebody else to come and use that. I guess the particular time when we see, the biggest conflict between guided and non-guided hunters generally occurs during the swan hunt. And so that's also the time period when a lot of the guides that we see on our WMAs would go to a spot and basically set up their decoys and stay there all day. And then they'll just shuttle clients in and out, where a non-guided hunter generally would go to that spot, finish their hunt up, and leave some time in their day, which would open it up for somebody else. That's certainly not always the case with non-guided hunters as well, but we see that during the swan hunt. We also see it during the late season with people hunting out on the lake for green-winged teal, where we see the guides shuffling people in and out throughout the day, sometimes 5, 10 hunters. So.
And I think just to clarify one part of Chris's question, that the decoys do not have to be removed as long as they are not unattended. So if someone is there attending the decoys could remain. And that could be the case in examples where if a hunter wanted to stay there overnight as well, the decoys could remain in place as long as they're attended to.
Is that happening? Sorry, Chris.
No, go ahead, Matt. I'm done.
I mean, my question is that happening? Do we know that that's happening?
I'm sorry, Matt, were you referring to people leaving their decoys?
Staying overnight. Are guides staying overnight and squatting on this place without just basically posted a sentinel there to hold the spot?
It certainly happens, as Wyatt mentioned, during the early part of the season, particularly on opening day and the youth hunt. People will go out there, sometimes showing up on a Wednesday and sitting there all the way till Saturday when the season opens. And so it does happen after the openers of the youth hunt and the general opener. We don't see it nearly as much, but there are people that will stay out overnight on occasion.
And so would this discussion be happening if we were talking about anything other than swans? I mean, I'm getting that that's the main point of contention here.
Probably swans is probably the highest pinch point for us throughout the year. But there are late season certainly is as well. We get a lot of outfitters who are guiding on, especially on kind of the outer edges of our marsh, on the lake bed. They're still on our property. Some on the interior units as well for cinnamon teal and primarily greenwing and shoveler shoots, where a lot of those don't actually occur on our property, but they are parking on our properties and then using our property to access sovereign lands on the Great Salt Lake.
Is it all right if I have so as far as the swans go, I believe, are there 2,750 swan permits a year? Is that where we're at right now?
Yep. Yes, we have 2,750 swan permits, and approximately 4,000 to 5,000 hunter days for those swan permits occur on our WMAs. And those are generally during the month of November when people are out hunting swans most.
So when we think of outfitters, I think that's where a lot of them, there's 2,750 hunters. Now if they go out on their own, if they use an outfitter, there's going to be 2,750 swan hunters that are out there in the marsh. And so the competition's there, if I'm understanding, whether it be someone's accompanied by a guide or if he's out there on his own or with his buddy. I just don't see how eliminating the guide during this is going to address how many people are out in the marsh. Is that a fair question to ask? How is this going to help the fact that I think the only thing I can see that it helps is maybe a few less people put in for swans because they don't have the equipment or the ability to get out there. But is it really banning guides? Is it going to do? I just don't see how it's going to help the crowding on the swan permits. There's still 2,750 swan permits and hunters out there.
This is taking in and maybe add another piece of context to this. Would that be appropriate, Mr. Chair?
Sure. Yes, please.
So one of the other things that I think is really interesting, and I think it needs to go to the heart of this very debate, is we all know that there's a lot of guiding happening on the WMAs and on Great Salt Lake. There's only one outfit in the entire state that is even bothering to go through the basic registration that is happening right now. So I think there is a lot of guiding. There's an exceptional amount of guiding occurring on these WMAs right now. And there is only one that is following the basic law that we even have right now. So I think some of this is meant to address some of that. So I don't know how you split this. I think the division's done a good job of coming up with recommendations, but we need to quit pretending like these are law-abiding individuals. There's only one outfit that's doing a good job of even following the minimum requirements that we have now.
Yeah,
this is Aaron. Well, if that's the case, why do we need new laws? Why don't we enforce the laws on the books? If there's only one obeying the laws, then why isn't the law enforcement section looking into the ones that are breaking the laws and taking enforcement action instead of restricting other people?
Well, I think the other component of that, however, too, is that they're not following the laws that there are in place, not getting licenses. But the other pieces of this bill requires registration, denoting of guides. There's some other things that need to be looked at. And an outright ban allows that the law that does get enforced to be enforced. There's a problem here that is happening on these WMAs, and whatever the division comes up with as a recommendation, but based on public feedback, I think will. So
I guess a follow-up question is, if they're not obeying the law now, we're going to ban them from hunting the wildlife management area, and you believe they're not going to break the law and go there?
Well, I believe then all you have to do is indicate that someone was guiding, and clearly they're in violation.
But how do you prove that?
I believe the division has plenty of ways to enforce that law, and a lot of states do. I think the other part of this that's critical to note is guiding is already banned on federal property. So you could guide somebody out on Willard Spur. You can not guide someone on Bear River Bird Refuge, even though they are adjacent to each other, and you can access one via the other.
And to speak to that a little bit, and so part of the problem we have right now is there aren't laws that make guiding illegal. There's really no stipulations as to what they can have to even go through to be a licensed guide for waterfowl hunting. And so that's part of the reason why in our rule, we do have some stipulations in there, as Greg mentioned, where they would apply for a special use permit to use our properties. And part of being approved for that permit, they would be required to have the minimum general liability insurance consistent with requirements in our 156-79-302. They have to provide proof of a passenger for hire license, and they would also have to not have any other violations for hunting or fishing license suspensions. So I guess that's our attempt to at least try to bring people into compliance to a minimum requirements and standards they'd have to have. And if they didn't have that from this point forward, if this is what is passed by the RAC, then they would have to at least have those to get a special use permit, which would then allow them to use our WMAs. So, and Wyatt, I don't know if you want to address how those would be enforced, but you're welcome to take a stab at it if you think it'd be helpful.
Yeah, it looks like I'm frozen. I could really use a new camera. I'll get one before I come on these again. But so enforcement would be, there's still a lot of things that we'd probably need to sort out a little bit, because you have in that guide reference, they talk about compensation of $100 or more being the standard for that, if I recall correctly. Blair, correct me if I'm wrong. And so filling up a tank of gas, that may be $5 by the end of the summer. And so deciphering those, we don't want to make criminals out of those that really aren't trying to be a guide or an outfitter. They're simply trying to take a friend out. So there'd be a education component associated with this as far as what is and isn't appropriate. Enforcement would take appropriate action on a case-by-case basis, whether it be education, notification, or citation, depending on the situation that we're handling. A lot of that would be yet to be determined and would have to be handled on a case-by-case basis. We certainly could find a way to do it, but the start of it would largely start with education, I believe.
This is Matt Clark as a follow-up. This probably would be more for Greg. I mean, do we have the authority to do that? I mean, is this through the DOPL and the Guides and Outfitters Act? Can we do this, really, from a legal standpoint?
So HB 295 incorporated a series of definitions from the Guides and Outfitters Act, and now they're placed in the Wildlife Code. So we use that as a starting spot. In our rule recommendation, we also incorporated some of those definitions and made them specifically applicable to waterfowl. One, by placing them in our rule, and two, by making it clear in the definitions we used that they applied to more than just big game that's historically been applied by DOPL. So, yeah, my opinion is that we do have the authority to do this, both this recommendation or some of the other permutations that have been volleyed out by both members of this RAC and others. So yeah, I am confident we have the authority to fulfill the division's recommendation.
Thank you. I mean, this sounds like more of a we need to establish professional standards issue than a yes or no guiding versus no guiding issue.
Paul, you've had your hand up for a little while. You have a question?
I'm just wondering, we're about 4 months out from the waterfowl season starting. I don't know what the state's special use permit process is. Do we even have time to get permits in place before the hunt starts?
Yeah, we definitely would. That's, again, one of the reasons why we're bringing it through in May is because the June board meeting would give us essentially 3.5 months to start issuing permits. Depending on the number of permits we get, I mean, it may slow the process down a little bit, but it's not something that would overwhelm us to the point that we couldn't get them out to people before the waterfowl season starts.
And how do you decide who gets them? Does anybody that applies get a permit, or do you have some kind of bid process or anything like that?
Yeah, so the criteria outlined in the rule is what people would have to do to get the permit. Once they completed those requirements and submitted their application, then we would approve them and allow them to get the permit and do whatever the stipulations allow them to do.
Okay, thank you.
So Blair, just to clarify on this permit, I was originally thinking the special use permit was just to travel through the WMA, but are you saying the special use permit is for outfitters hunting on the WMA with the people they're guiding?
And so based on our proposal would be to not allow guides to use our properties for hunting purposes, but they would be allowed to get a permit to essentially park in our parking areas, use our boat launch to access non-division lands. And so it wouldn't allow them to hunt on the property, but they would be able to transport people across it to hunt other properties outside of our WMAs.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure that was clear. Thanks.
I have one more.
Go ahead.
I have one more. So what about like kids? So if a parent hunts, he takes his kid hunting, but let's say there's a kid that wants to get into hunting, doesn't have a parent that hunts. So that guardian has to hire a guide. Now, maybe someone out of the kindness of their heart will take a kid on a Make-A-Wish Foundation or whatever. But if that's not the case, what do these kids do that want to go waterfowl hunting if they can't be guided?
So it certainly doesn't impact anybody from mentoring people during hunts. And so, I mean, people would still be allowed.
That's not what I'm asking. Like out of the kindness of your heart, you could take your neighbor. But let's say that they don't have anybody that is going to mentor them. They don't know anybody in the hunting community. They moved here from Arkansas. They don't know anybody. I mean, there's people out there that don't have hunting friends, and they want to take their kid hunting. Their kid has expressed a desire. The division promotes this all the time. It's the future. Kids, 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 kids. Some of these people don't hunt, and their kid wants to get into this sport, and they're the future. They have to use a guide.
Yeah, and that's a great question. And we're not prohibiting guiding on a statewide level. It's specifically just on our waterfowl management areas. But
so where would they take a duck hunter? They can't go on the federal refuge, and now they can't go on the state wildlife management areas. Where would an outfitter take a kid duck hunting? Private property, is that it?
Yeah. Many guides in the state operate on private property. They have fields leased. They have access to river systems, access to sloughs, ponds, marshes, all that stuff. There's a lot of people that currently do that and would still be able to do that. They could offer their services and take anybody out. I mean, they could even go out on the Great Salt Lake. It's specifically, they just wouldn't be able to hunt on our properties, which our properties make up, like I said, about 120,000 acres total across the state. Anything outside of that, they'd be able to guide on, unless it was a refuge, of course.
I'm going to have to jump in on this one real quick. This is, I think, a misnomer on I got more emails than I got feedback forms on this. I got well over 100 emails and feedback form combined. Way too much misinformation on this. There's oodles of places to go hunting ducks that are not in WMAs. Twice in my life have I ever used a guide to waterfowl. One was for ducks in the Salt Lake, and another was for geese on private property. So just because guides cannot hunt, if this were to pass, if guides could not hunt in the WMAs, that does not preclude someone from going duck hunting with the guide. There's still ample places to do that.
But that's great. But it does prevent them from hunting on the DW or the WMAs and federal. Correct?
Yeah, but federal's already illegal. You can't
right.
go on.
No, I understand that. Now we're trying to make the state one.
And I would say most first-time hunters probably aren't even aware there's waterfowl guides. And we have tons of first-time hunters that come out to our WMAs every year. Most of them are standing on a dike. They're just walking around with their shotgun shooting stuff. And so, there's plenty of opportunities for people to go waterfowl hunting for the first time without a guide. If you choose to do that and have a mentored experience with a guide, I mean, there are also plenty of areas to do that all across the state.
Mike, I see you got a question.
I guess, after reading the amount of comments and questions and things that we got through via email, I think we're maybe missing one component of this whole thing, and it's the public that are using the guides. On more than one occasion, reading through these emails, they couldn't afford the decoys or to maintain a boat for a year or store one, and they liked having the opportunity, if they were going to go 3 times a year, to take friends and family out on these WMAs. It's not, we keep talking about the guides and things as though they're different people, but they're actually our hunting public utilizing somebody to take advantage of our WMA. So in my opinion, I kind of go back to what Aaron was saying, accessing these public places, it's our hunting public that are I guess utilizing the services of guides. At least from the amount of emails that I read, there was an awful lot. And I'm not talking about the inundation we got, from the link and stuff. I'm talking about those that just take advantage of, 2-3 times a year to access places they otherwise, maybe couldn't on their own. So that's my only comment on that. I just thought I'd share that.
I think I can't see. Kristen, did you have a question as well?
I do. My question harkens back to a topic we've already talked about, which was the properly permitted guides. We've talked about there being only one in the state that has done the full measure of the proper licensing and permitting. My question is really to Captain Bubak, and that is, how often during your law enforcement operations do you question or request from guides that you meet out there? Do they have the proper permits on them? How often do we find this problem, out in the field?
As stated already, currently there is no standard for licensing. I believe, if what I'm understanding first and the interpretation of House Bill 295 is correct, that's what would be implemented with this bill. So we've never checked it in the past because it's never been a requirement.
Thank you.
Laura here. I think that really is the problem, is that law enforcement can't enforce anything because there's nothing to enforce. I'm not necessarily opposed to guiding. I think there needs to be some limits, and I think there needs to be some regulation. And that's, I guess, where I'd like to see this go. I mean, it sounds like the law enforcement's hands are pretty much tied, because right now there's no regulation. There's no way for them. There's nothing for them to enforce.
That would be correct. The only regulations right now we can enforce is basically the wildlife related regulations tied to take, season things, basically the same enforcement measures that the public would be subject to if they hunted on their own.
Why would it be helpful if if you knew who those guides were? So if a permit was put in place, a way to be able to permit guides to go on the WMAs, you would know X such and such, these 3-4 outfitters, whoever have you, they now have a permit in hand. You know exactly who they are. So because they have the permit, they've met all these requirements from the state parks and from Doppel and everything. They know they're there. So now that they're there, you can, as your guys are patrolling, they see that, okay, this such and such outfitter, we know he's permitted. This person has no permit. Would that not make your job easy and be able to enforce to say this is illegal?
It would make it easier as far as identifying the ones that are doing it legally. Our challenge, I believe, would come from the people receiving under the table compensation, gifts in trade, things of that nature. That's where it would be become more challenging for us. Those individuals that don't have those licenses that are trying to sidestep the requirements there.
Do you think that's probably going to happen? I mean, I know it's a hypothetical question or whatever you want to say, but I think we'd be crazy to think that's still not going to happen, even if it goes through the wildlife board next month and bans it. To think that's not going to continue to happen, it's kind of the same.
Yeah,
I think the same thing.
Yeah, like you said, would be making assumptions there. I think it will happen both accidentally and probably intentionally. However, if I had to guess, I'd assume those that are trying to be legitimate or that are kind of the bigger operators now would follow the regulations that are put into place. But those that are operating in a smaller scale where it's not worth their effort to go through all the licensing, those would be the ones we'd have to look into, and that would present the more workload for the enforcement section.
Mike, I see you got a question.
Don't you guys to some degree believe it would self-regulate? Like Justin just said, you have 4 or 5 guys that go and meet the requirements, get the permit. Maybe it's a bound number for identification reasons for law enforcement. Don't you think they self-regulate those that haven't done that? I mean, they're out there every day. I think that to some degree you'll get help from those that have gone through the trouble of the permitting and that kind of stuff, kind of managing and watching those that are, running clients that haven't gone through the process.
Who's that question directed towards, Mike? Sorry.
Why don't you take that one?
Yeah, I think there is a likelihood of that occurring. I know that if I was in the shoes of following the regulations and meeting the standards of a guide, if I observed that, I would assume that it's likely that those individuals would be reported. At least those doing it to a large enough scale that it's readily obvious to those guides that have gone through it.
Hey, this is Aaron. I agree with that 100%. In the hound dog world, catching a lion or bear requires hounds. And that's the biggest gripe among outfitters is all the houndsmen are taking their friends for free. So I legitimately, if I take Justin Oliver on a hunt because he's my buddy, there'll be an outfitter that will report me for illegal guiding. I mean, it happens all the time, and there's no guiding there. I just took Justin for free. But because there's money involved, I think you're right, Mike. It will self-regulate. The outfitters that are legit will do it. But once again, it's unenforceable for these guys under the table. I mean, we can hope and wish that we catch them, but they're not. Like illegal guiding for big game, it goes on in the state at a much, much, much larger scale than any hunting by 100 times. And we're not doing anything about that.
Chair, I've got a question. Justin?
Oh, I was on mute. Sorry. Kevin, go ahead. And then after Kevin, we'll have Matt.
So a question for the AG's office. According to HB 295, it says that no one can use, the guide cannot use the Waterfowl Management Area unless they go through these certain steps. And then it goes on to say that the Wildlife Board shall enact rules and regulations to support that. So my question is, will it take a legislative change, go back to the legislature? Wouldn't House Bill 295 have to be changed to eliminate guiding?
So that's a good question. 295 also includes a savings clause at the very end of the bill that preserves the division's authority to manage their properties according to both their land use statute and the rule that's promulgated under that statute. One of those authorities is the ability to regulate commercial activity or prohibit certain types of commercial activity. So when we came into this HB 295 situation, the division on its own had the ability to regulate uses of its lands. Historically, they have not applied that to guiding activities, but the bill does preserve that authority. Second, it also, the HB 295 doesn't have a deadline or a date when those rules must be passed. It does require that the division report to interim committee each fall as to rules that were amended or enacted in response to 295, but there's not an initial date mandated by the bill on when the board passed their initial set of rules regulating this activity. So as far as whether 295 would need to be amended in order to, I guess if I'm understanding your question correctly, would it need to be amended in order to enact the current proposal that we're proposing? No, that's not my opinion. I think the division already had that ability and it was preserved under that land use, the land statute. Now, as far as what we do with interim this fall, the timing of when Mr. Stringham brought his proposal forward was based in part on the survey and in part on a deadline that we were trying to meet to be able to come back to interim and propose what, or report on what the Wildlife Board had done. And so if we don't make this interim, we'll make the next one. But that in part was why we're on the time frame that we're on, is because we were trying to meet that November deadline.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Matt.
Thank you. I think my question is probably more for Blair at this point. I mean, just as an intro, I'm a big river runner, and we put in for river permits, whitewater rafting permits. Their system basically allocates a set number of permits for private boaters and a set number of permits for commercial outfitters based on user days. In your survey, your supplemental survey that you presented at the beginning of this meeting, do you have a feeling for what would be a reasonable number of user days for determining how many guide permits might be issued on a given WMA?
We haven't had many conversations along those lines. I guess our initial thought was we would just prohibit guiding, but if it's probably something that we would look at in the future, specifically with allowing people to cross the WMAs. I mean, if we got inundated with permits for people to do that and go out to specific areas, it might be something we would address in the future. But currently, we don't really have any limitations on the number of permits we would issue. It would just be on a fulfill these requirements, smear application. Here's your special use permit.
All right, we're still on the questions. I think we've had a lot of great questions. A lot of things are going up. I think there's probably plenty of comments as well. Is there, Matt, do you still have another question? I was just gonna say before we go to comments, if there's any more questions.
I definitely have a comment. I don't think I have any additional questions at this time.
Does the RAC feel pretty good? Like we've asked a lot of questions and had that need to be asked. I imagine there might be a few more come up as comments come, but I would like to switch over to the comment section at this time if everyone's okay with that. So, and Matt, you've got your hand up. Let's start with yours.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not opposed to guiding in general. I mean, I don't have a boat and I don't have a garage full of decoys. I've shot 4 or 5 swans just basically off the dike. But stating that I'm not opposed to guiding, I think there needs to be regulation. And I think there's going to need to be a limit on the number of guys licensed on a given WMA. These things are shrinking. They're getting smaller every year. And so we're concentrating more and more people into a shrinking space. And I guess I would not necessarily be in favor of just eliminating guiding altogether. I don't think this Wild West, anybody that goes out there can do whatever they want thing is going to fly. I think there needs to be a regulatory scheme in place, and I think there needs to be an upper limit on the number of guys that's allowed on a given property.
Thank you. Let's go ahead. Darren, you have a comment.
Yeah. You know, I've been on here a year or 2 years, and I never make comments. I represent the Shoshone Nation, and I never get fired up or say anything, but I'm really fired up about this. And so I think just banning guiding is the lazy, to be honest. And I don't know how else to say it. And I don't mean to be disrespectful at all, but I think it's the lazy approach, because you don't have regulations set up for guides that do waterfowl. Well, set them up and regulate it like you do everything else. You would never propose banning guides on big game hunts, ever. And why? Because the lobby would eat you alive, and there wouldn't be a lawmaker in town that would pass that, because it's too big. So license the guides, set them regulations, manage them like you do all the other guides in the state, and let's move on. I'm not pro-guide at all. In fact, if you did a survey of big game hunters that run into guides in the field, 90% would be opposed to having guides in the field. But because that lobby is so big, you wouldn't dare tackle it. And the lobby for waterfowl is so small and non-existent that it's easy to do and just ban it. That's crazy to me. And so I am let's just set up some regulations for those guides and enforce the laws that we have. It's my only comment.
Okay, Randy. And then we'll go to Casey after Randy.
Get my mic on. Okay, I'm going to hit a couple things real quick. One, we've got to remember that this is an extremely small piece of land, collectively speaking, that we're talking about. It's not like all the vast public land that we have for big game. So these are distinctly different issues, and nobody in their right mind would go with the guy that goes to a WMA to go hunting. Okay, this is an extremely small piece of land we're dealing with that we're getting a lot of public hunters on. And I'm going to be just a second because I'm fired up on this. I'm baffled by the emails and stuff I got talking about you can't go hunting unless you go with the guide. I grew up without anybody hunting around me. My father passed away, so my brother and I, we learned how to hunt by going waterfowling. That's the easiest sport in the world to learn to do on your own. It absolutely can be done, and that's what these WMAs are for, is for the public hunters to be able to go out and get that opportunity to hunt. It's so much easier to do than, I'm an upland hunter is my primary thing. That's much harder, more expensive to do than the waterfowl. It's the quintessential public hunting. That's why I think this is so important. We don't want this to become a money game in the WMAs. It's just such a small piece of land. If we've got people that are consistently monopolizing the cherry spots, it just forces the people out that don't have the money to do those guides. And like I said, I have guides on a couple locations, but not in the WMAs. This is too important for public hunters. It's just such small pieces of land. We've got to treat it different than we treat everything else. And I've got to throw out a couple other quick things. I've been in contact, I was surprised, because one of the emails that I'm sure we all got was from the Utah Waterfowl Association. And I actually reached out to him and said, like, hey, who are you guys? Who do you represent? Got more background because I wasn't super familiar with them. And I asked him, like, why aren't we seeing a lot of response or feedback from you guys? Because they said we thought it was a done deal. The public surveys that everyone took show overwhelming support for this proposal. Okay, but I'll bet you my next paycheck that every email I got and every feedback form I received is a client from the one licensed guide that we have. Matter of fact, I know most of them are because I've talked to several people that are their clients. And they were reached out and specifically asked to give feedback on this. So this is a public land issue to me. We've got to be able to give public hunters that don't have the money to get guides, give them an access to get onto these pieces of property that they normally don't have, and as easy a chance to get to. So just thought I'd throw that out there. Appreciate it.
Casey.
So so I ran this bill and started all of this. I apologize for I've never seen Darren Perry fired up, so I would run a bill just to see that. So anyway, I've accomplished something else, but I kind of want to take a different take on this. I want to be very clear about what I as maybe break down the process and what I'm watching as this moves through the process. So HB 295 was an attempt to make into law certain regulations where the RAC process had fallen short. Now, it doesn't have anything to do with this specific issue. Never been addressed in RAC, but baiting had gone through the Bill Deer work and had failed because of some of the biases of members of the Wildlife Board, not because public sentiment wasn't in play or the biological issue wasn't in play. Like, those issues were resolved, and we know where the division was. But for certain lobbies, I guess we've thrown that term around, so maybe we'll reemphasize it. There are certain lobbies that wanted certain things to happen, and when the Wildlife Board finally met, that's what happened. Now, what one of the criticisms of the bill was, go through the RAC, go through the public process, garner public feedback, look at biological questions or division recommendations, and come back with a rule. And that's what I attempted to do on this piece and on the trail camera piece, which I'm sure we will settle out at a later RAC board meeting, baiting already having had its chance. And so I'm not so concerned one way or another what the recommendation is, but I think what we've seen is overwhelming public support for a specific decision that the division has made. We've heard from division employees specific recommendations based on usage or biological questions, and they've come to the RAC process with, in my mind, overwhelming justification for a decision. And a lobby has been engaged that has pushed back on that decision for specific interests, which I think are legitimate. And now, as the RAC process is moving forward, we're sitting here questioning both the public opinions that we've garnered and the division itself. And so, to me, as someone who honestly could go either way on a final decision on this, I'm frustrated that we're putting so much faith in the credibility of this process and then undermining it as it goes through the process. So I am very cognizant, and I'll watch how this goes. I have the way I'm going to vote on this, but I think we need to give deference to the division and to the public whom we're serving. That's the point of the RAC. So that's again, going back to some of my good friend Darren's comments, like lobbies should not be the ones pushing on these issues. I think he's absolutely right. If this was a big game issue, the lobby would be coming out of the woodwork, and I think that's fundamentally wrong. And I think we're seeing parts of that here, and I think it's time to listen to the division, and I think it's time to listen to the public. And so I'm going to support the division on the recommendation.
Justin, this is Aaron. Can I have some time?
Yes, Aaron, go ahead.
So I want to thank Darren for his comments. I 100% agree. I think it's the easy way out. I'm kind of disappointed. They did pass House Bill 295, but I'm disappointed that the division jumped right to banning hunting for a certain group. I think that sends the wrong message. I think it's the wrong direction. I think that there should be, more put into it, and maybe restrict the number of outfitters that can go. I'm surprised that there's no outfitting regulations for waterfowl in Utah. I think that needs to be fixed. I think that creating some good laws about maybe the decoys can't be out for 24 hours a day will prevent anybody from camping out with their decoys, or some guide paying some kid to sleep out there. But listen, this is happening to other species. These big outfitters are paying 35 flat limber high school kids to go watch an elk for a month, and it doesn't leave their sight. And then some $1 million guy comes in and shoots it. period. That happens every single year, and the division gets hundreds of thousands of dollars from the doctor and is grateful. So if that's not ethical, then maybe having decoys out for a week with some guy sitting on them is not ethical, and there needs to be a law made where decoys can be out for 24 hours and then you've got to leave. I really liked Randy's comments. Randy, I was much like you. My dad grew up hunting to live because he was so poor, and then he had no desire to hunt afterwards. So I taught myself. When I turned 16, my dad didn't want to go hunting anymore. So I taught myself how to hunt everything. And I did too, start on ducks, and I walked through the muck in waders for a mile packing decoys, which was harder than any football camp, any SWAT camp, or anything in America. I don't know that there's a kid in the world that would do it today. I don't think they've ever been born. And so it is hard, and it can be self-taught. But in today's world, unfortunately, people use guides. People have more money, and that's kind of the gateway to hunting. Now, I'm going to take my daughter, I'm going to take my nephew, and we're going to mentor kids, and it is the future of the sport. But so many people getting into this sport do use guides, adults included, that have never hunted. I think the surveys are a bunch of crap. I think the surveys are written to solicit a response that they want. I think they've been written that way for years. They solicit things if they think they have a problem, and then everybody says there's a problem. If they put out a survey that said, are we happy with the DWR's management of Utah wildlife, it would overwhelmingly be negative. Are we happy with the deer herds? It would overwhelmingly be negative. But they won't. They'll put out a survey to generate a response that they want, which is, do you not like guides in the woods? And it kind of puts people, they start to think, no, I don't like guides because I don't like to see them out there. I'm tired of the few complaining, and we jump to prohibit the many. And I know that the guides are few. I'm not pro guide or not. I'm just me. I just represent sportsmen on this RAC and then myself. But I do think that it's lazy. I would hope that they would limit the number of guides in the WMA. If you're a licensed outfitter in Utah hunting big game, you have to have insurance. You have to have a use permit for BLM, for Forest Service, for SITLA, school trust lands. And you should have to have a permit for a WMA, and a percentage of your proceeds or a fee should go along with that. And there's a limit. They don't give unlimited outfitter licenses for a certain national forest. And there could be a limit on how many outfitters can hunt the Harold Crane WMA or WMAs for waterfowl in general. And that they may have to apply for that each year and set a limit so that it's not overcrowding. I hate the overcrowding comments. It's hunting, and that's the way hunting is. And we are recruiting kids to hunt so that it's more crowded on a daily basis. That's kind of my thought. I don't like new regulations. I have a real problem with the WMAs in general. I hate that they close them down. It's public property. I wish they stayed open all the time. I hate that they close them down, and I understand that they want to protect wintering wildlife and grass and all that type of stuff. Well, educate the public, but don't shut me out of my public land, because it's happening in other states where they're closing the federal lands. And I'm not talking Zion's National Park. I'm talking Forest Service and BLM. The way it's going, you're going to be able to go to the Forest Service for 8 days to hunt deer and then never go again. And I don't want to see that on WMAs where the state makes another restriction and another restriction. I mean, what's next year? Is there no big game guiding on WMAs? Because there's big game WMAs as well. And it's the wrong direction. To me, it's an anti-hunting proposal. You're trying to restrict a certain group of people to go hunting. I don't care if you limit the numbers, because this small piece of area can't handle that many areas. In Illinois, I have a good friend who's the Illinois Waterfowl Association president. They draw. You show up in the morning and you draw for a blind, and you draw for what day and all that type of stuff. I hope it doesn't get to that way in Utah, but I think we're headed there fast. Or we can just learn to get along and decide to not go to the crowded places. Those are just some of my thoughts. Appreciate the time, but I think I vote for no new regulations that ban hunting for a certain group.
Thank you, Aaron. I just wanted to take a second for a comment as well. I think we cannot as Casey mentioned, as Randy's mentioned, we can't overlook the 60% of people who are against, who would like to ban guides. And I just feel like there's a way that we could compromise and really help that out. I mean, Aaron touched on, some of the questions that went out there. I mean, no one wants another person hunting next to them. So I just feel like the banning guides, we could hear the words of that overwhelming 60% of people who don't like guides. We could still hear them. And I think regulating guides and putting things together would be heeding to their words without getting rid of them. I mean, we could put I think just that, if you put a survey out about people's, if they're content or not with the division, it'd go out and it'd be voted no. And I think it would be unfair. It's just, there's no deer out there, and it's, the deer numbers are down, and the division's blamed for all of that. And people would vote, if we put a vote out there, that would happen, and it wouldn't be appropriate to, let's just get rid of the division because there's not deer out there. And I think there's other ways that we can hear those 60% their words, and also not cut out those public hunters who are also using guides. And so I would just like to see a compromise and where we can help both parties there. I've got a lot of hands going up. Kristen, I haven't heard from you for a minute. Let's start with Kristen.
I would like to support both Darren, Aaron's viewpoint, and also yours, Justin. The issue of, I'm having a hard time connecting the dots from the point at which HB 295 required a permit for guides to the point where the division recommended banning guides. And even though we have the survey that shows that 60 some odd % of survey respondents were opposed to guides, Aaron's words are ringing in my ears here about, you can ask leading questions on a survey to get people to answer the way you want to answer. And so one of the questions that I noticed on the survey, it was not, do you support or oppose guides? The question was, do you oppose or support guiding? So the first word that was planted in people's head is, do you oppose? So I don't think it's so remarkable that more people than not, answered that they opposed. In addition, the Mike Waters issue that the guides are supporting the general public. There seems to be a line drawn in the wrong place about who the guides are supporting. And there is a subset of the population of people who are beginners, they are less familiar, they don't have time, they don't have the resources, and therefore the guides are allowing them to have that opportunity that they would not otherwise have. And so just automatically painting with such a broad brushstroke and saying no guiding on the WMAs, this, in my view, is throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And I am also very interested in, a compromise so that the question does not come out in either black or white, that there is an opportunity for both camps to be able to hunt on WMAs.
Thank you, Kristen. Let's go to Darren and then Matt. Darren, is your hand still up? Oh, it just still shows Matt. Is yours still up, or is that from before?
Mine is still up. I mean, listening to the comments from the RAC and looking at the comments from the public, my impression is that this is really too big right now. I had asked prior to this meeting going live what happened with the Central Region, and the Central Region voted to have a committee to look into this further. And my opinion is that is something like that really needs to happen. I don't think we're going to hash this out. I think it has to do with number of user days. I think it has to do with licensing requirements. I think it's premature to try to make a decision based on the information that we have right now. And I would encourage some kind of motion, like there needs to be a need to involve parties, and we need to have some sort of both regulation and limits on the number of guys that we're going to allow on any particular WMA.
I'd like to add to that too. I think in addition, it'd be great. Maybe this is too hard to do, but there seems to be a lot of hearsay about how crowded it really is and what's really going on. And I'm sure that partly comes down to limited resources for enforcement. But to really make these claims and to really make judgments off of them and to verify people's complaints, regardless of how the survey is written, I think it would really be good to have some actual data. Maybe you're just tracking people coming in and out of the ramp, like a Creel survey or something like that. But somehow it seems like that kind of thing, because there is a competitive aspect to this, right? And so people are always going to be tempted to get rid of their competitors. And people are also going to be frustrated by other people. It's just like driving in traffic. It just happens. People get angry at each other, for things that maybe in the end aren't a big deal. So I think some real data on this kind of use and to back up these claims or establish what's really going on really makes a lot of sense.
All right. So far, most of our comments, our questions, there was a couple sections and parts to this proposal. Right now, our 99.9% of our discussion has all been talking about the guiding of or banning of guides on WMAs. There's a few other things also that pertain to this, but if we have more comments, I'd like to hear them. If not, if someone does make a motion, when that time comes, I would ask that maybe keep the motion pertaining just to the subject that we're talking about right now, and that would be the banning of guides on WMAs. But still, if we're not there, if we have more comments, that's great. But if not, I'd also.
Justin, I've got a comment.
Okay, go ahead, Kevin.
I would really feel remiss if I didn't voice my support and thanks to the division for what they've done. They've taken here again another issue that's extremely controversial, and they were directed by the legislature and they're to go through this public process. I don't think that the survey, I read the survey, I don't think it was skewed. I think the questions were asked and over 5,000 people responded. And I think that I was talking to a former wildlife resources lieutenant today that I know real well. And he said, that's amazing to get 5,000 people to respond. We can't just say that doesn't matter. It does matter. And the division did exactly what they were asked to do. I don't think it's lazy. I think that it's exactly what they were asked to do, and they did it in the best way that they could. And I think that the public has spoken. I believe strongly that, and I'm a hunter. I'm a duck hunter. I'm a waterfowl hunter. I hunt on private property. But I talk to guys. I know guys that hunt that spur. I know the air boaters that go out there, and their concerns. Now, with all that said, I'm not opposed to a process of vetting this out in a committee. The SFW made a proposal in their letter to table it and to take it to a committee, form a committee, and have them give some more time to this. I'm not opposed to that, but they were also very, very specific about the decisions need to be focused on the everyday hunter, not the special interest. So I just I'm very pleased with what the division did and how they did it, and I hope we can come to some consensus.
Mr. Chair, I know I'm not a member of the RAC, but would you afford me just a brief moment of privilege to speak?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. I just want to make sure tonight that we don't lose sight of some really important foundational principles for us that, we're here tonight to discuss the merits of the proposal, and there are merits on both sides of the conversation tonight. There's been a lot of really good questions. I just don't want to lose sight of the fact that there's honest folks on both sides of this issue that have made every attempt to hear from folks and to make a good decision tonight. That's a big difference from the division skewing questions in order to get an answer that the division is perceived to have wanted. It's no secret that this conflict has existed in the wetlands for quite some time. And when HB 295 was passed after its fourth substitute, it's very clear that there's an issue that needs to be resolved. And so that's what we're after tonight. In fact, when this recommendation comes forward, it's our goal to listen to the public, and we've made that recommendation. It's not anything that would be self-serving or anything that's a secret. In fact, in HB 295 specifically, it even says that the Wildlife Board shall make rules that would preserve the opportunity for non-guided hunters to use waterfowl management areas. So that's where the recommendation is coming from. It's not coming from a place where we're intentionally skewing any of the questions in order to get any of an outcome that we're looking for. We hire human dimension scientists and social scientists to help us word those questions so that we don't do that. But hopefully that provides just a reminder that anchors us tonight in making sure that we're having conversations within the best context and best light tonight. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you,
hey,
Ben.
Justin, if there's no more comments, I'd like to make a motion, but I want to address what I think Matt said real quick, and then I'm ready to make a motion if there's no more comments after that comment.
Go ahead. Do you have a comment?
The comment I have is that I think the division, some people have, championed the division. I agree that they did that, but we don't know how many outfitters are going to comply with regulations because they're not been given the opportunity to comply. If the division had chosen a different path and put up some restrictions that they have to apply for certain licenses and permits and this and that, this problem could have been resolved by people not complying, and the overcrowding and everything would have gone away. But it was just a carte blanche, let's lock them out, shut them down. And so I think by allowing the division to follow House Bill 295 and put some restrictions in there for licensed guides and outfitters to get permits and register boats and do whatever they decide to do and see how many comply and see if that fixes the problem is a great idea. And I would hope that that's what happened tonight. And if there's no more comments, I'd like to make a motion. I mean, we may get the data we're looking for by just requiring a permit, a guide permit out there. And those that don't apply for it can't guide. And who knows, maybe it'll resolve itself like Mr. Louder said earlier. If there's only one that's in compliance now, maybe the guides and outfitters that are doing on the table will go away. And we won't have this issue, but we won't know until we give them a chance and see, was there 100 people that applied for guide licenses or only one? Because we're just trying to shut it down from the get-go. And I think there needs to at least be some consideration to follow 295 and allow outfitters to get permits to guide out there.
All right. Would you like to make a motion, Aaron?
If there's no other comments, I can make a motion. I don't want to.
Okay. Yeah, I don't want to jump in it if we still have some comments. I think we could.
Okay, I'll make a motion then. I make a motion that then this motion is just directed to the part about guiding on WMAs. I make a motion that we reject the division's clause about guiding on WMAs, prohibiting guiding on WMAs, and instruct them to, create a process for guides to apply for permits and licenses and pay a fee and see what happens this year. See if they get a bunch of data. See if it is truly a problem. So my motion is to reject the DWR's proposal to prohibit guiding on WMAs or travel of guides through WMAs. I think they should be able to travel through it without a special vaccine permit or whatever.
So, Aaron, this is what I wrote down, and we have a motion on the table to reject the proposal of prohibiting guides on WMAs and direct the division to provide a permit to allow legal guiding to legal guiding and shuttling through of WMAs
by guides and outfitters.
Okay.
I think that covers, what House Bill 295 was requiring. All respects to, the surveys and what they did, but I think that would comply with 295 and maybe get some data on if it really is a problem once they license everything. That's my comments about the proposal. So.
Justin, this is
Mike, go ahead.
I was just going to ask Aaron, do you think that, and this is just a question for Aaron, do you think is there a better way to collect the data or as opposed to issuing guide licenses prior to finding out if it's a problem? Is there something we could do preemptive that would, some sort of a committee, we have working groups for everything in the state. I mean, for predator management.
Well, maybe there is, Mike, but I think we're kind of running out of time to set up committees and then bring in the new proposal back to the RAC. Sure. And so for this year, 295 directs the division to issue permits for guiding on the WMA. They just said no guiding on it. I think that if we followed 295 this year and issued permits, who knows if it's going to be 100 or 10 or 1? We don't know. It may resolve itself. Can we have the committee and see if it is a problem? Absolutely. And see if it needs to be more restrictive. And they could bring it back next year and say there was 100 guides that applied for an outfitter permit on Harold Crane. And that's too many. Maybe they need to outlaw guiding on Harold Crane or set the number at 5 or whatever. But to set a number, we don't even know how many people are going to apply. This has never happened before. We're just carte blanche outlawing guiding on WMA for waterfowl.
Okay, before we have a motion on the, before us right now, and I'm going to state it, and then I'm going to ask for a second. So this is the motion that I have: reject the proposal to prohibiting guides on WMAs and provide a permit to allow legal guiding and shuttling through WMAs by guides and outfitters. That is a motion that is on the table. Do I have a second?
Substitute motion, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
So I actually would substitute motion that we accept the division's proposal and then include the study component. So I don't think there's any harm in doing a study. I think that's actually a pretty good point, and I support that. But I don't support a proposal that out of hand dismisses the opinions of 5,000 respondents because of a handful of emails. So I think that maybe that can end up in the same place. Like that addresses the time issue. We go forward this year, we'll just say no guiding on WMAs based on public perception, but we give the division time to study it out and come up with a working group, which has been mentioned. I think that's about value, and go forward. So again, my substitute motion would be to accept the division's proposal as recommended and direct the division to establish a working group to study guiding opportunities on WMAs.
Okay, I'm not real, before I recognize the substitute proposal. Before we recognize that, I'd still like to know if I have a second for our original as presented. And then, and if it's a substitute, do I need to ask if Aaron would accept that substitute? This is new grounds for me. Ben, you may need to help me with that.
Yeah, and if Stacy or anybody else wants to correct me if I'm wrong, I think we need to take action on the underlying motion first, unless Aaron sees that as a friendly amendment. I think we could entertain that amendment or amended motion, but
the substitute motion would be completely it would basically negate, because it would go ahead and it would ban guiding in total. So, I mean, I guess it's up to Aaron, but I think I know the answer to this.
Justin, this is Aaron. I'll pipe in here. I think the committee is a great idea. Casey, Mike Louder, I think that's a great idea, and that can be a separate motion. But I agree. This is a complete opposite of what my motion is, basically. And so I would like to see if there's a second. If there's not, we can see if there's a second on Casey and have a vote.
Okay. So back to the original motion to reject the proposal and to provide a permit to allow legal guiding on shuttling through WMAs by guides and outfitters. Do I have a second?
This is Matt Clark speaking. Aaron, would you be amenable to amending your proposal to include the study within your proposal? So, I mean, I think one of the big problems that we have right now is that there's not enough time to make this out of whole cloth. We either need to allow guiding this year or not. And separately, we need to have some sort of looking into this more deeply.
Mr. Chair, before we get into too much confusion, I think just a quick point of order. I think we have a motion that doesn't have a second.
Yeah. So
if there isn't a second, then we move on to the substitute motion.
Okay.
But I think we ought to entertain the underlying motion, have a second, and then if there is no second, then we entertain the substitute motion. If there is no second to that, then we could entertain another motion from a RAC member. I think that would keep it cleaner. Let's just.
Okay. So
we're
Matt,
not amending, and
I'd ask Matt to keep that on hand, to come back with what you were stating. So.
Or Aaron could revoke his motion if he liked where Matt was headed there too.
This is Aaron. Let me ask Matt a quick question. Matt, are you proposing keeping the motion the same and requesting that a committee be convened to study this issue this year, or with the data gathered from this hunting year in the fall?
I don't believe that there's time to do this before the waterfowl season. My point is that we regulate the outfitters this year. We use that data that goes into a committee. This comes back next year.
Matt, I completely agree with that. I completely agree. That was the point I was trying to make, is regulate them this year, collect some data, see if it's a true problem, and if it really is, they can be outlawed or more restricted next year. Or not regulated, but licensed this year. So I agree. And I didn't want to make a motion with committees and that. So I just wanted to make a motion to reject the no guiding on WMAs and the no drive-through WMAs by guides. And then I think a separate motion can be to convene a committee to study this issue further, for next year.
Okay, so you agreed with Matt, but you still don't want to add, you don't want to amend your original motion? You want to still keep it?
Well, I'm more than happy to amend it if you think it's not too long of a motion, because I think Matt's right that needs to be a motion as well. But we can amend it to make it a really long motion if that's what you want.
I think it might help garner you some votes or not. I mean, it's up to you. But
I think technically, Mr. Chair,
help me out, Ben.
There would need to be a second on the motion.
Yeah. So he
on the
needs
underlying motion. So if that's what Matt seconded, then there would have to be a revision that the maker of the motion would agree to, and then the body could vote on it, on the amendment. So this is getting really messy, really fast.
Okay. I think I can fix this. So
okay.
We did not get the original motion. We did not get a second. As you know, as motion was presented, we had a lot of discussion after. I feel that the correct thing to do was say that this motion fails for lack of a second at this time, and then would entertain another motion. So I'm going to say that I will state that this motion fails as presented fails for lack of a second.
If it fails, this case.
So now I think you would move to Casey's motion.
Okay, so that's Casey's. Okay, so this first motion fails for lack of a second. I hope Mike's writing this down, and Jody and everyone else. I think I've got it now. Casey had what was the terminology? A substitute. What?
At this point, let's just call it Casey made a motion.
Casey made a motion to accept the proposal as presented to ban, I guess just as presented, to ban guides from WMAs. Am I right, Casey? And will you repeat that? Is Casey on here?
I saw that he got dropped a second ago. I don't know if he's rejoined us.
Perfect timing.
This is not good.
He had the second portion of his language was, I think, related to having the division convene the committee.
Accept the proposal to ban for this coming year.
Well, I think Casey's motion was the kind of the mirror image of Aaron's. He wanted to ban it for this year and have a committee. And I don't know that at this late date, I don't know that that's necessarily fair to the outfitters. I mean, they've already invested for the coming season. I would submit that that's not fair.
So that's not the point. What was the recommendation? What was it that Casey said? Then we can vote on it.
Casey said accept the division's proposal as presented, and then recommend that the division convene a committee to discuss ways for guides to operate on WMAs. And so Matt's right in that it is kind of a mirror opposite, but Casey's basically saying accept it for now and then get to work with the committee, where Aaron was saying reject it now and then get to work with the committee.
Yeah. I'm struggling to put this motion forward and put words in his mouth without him being on the call.
I know. Hopefully he's trying to jump back on and that we're getting it right in his absence.
That's.
But we can take a 5-minute break while we get him back on the line. It's probably the best move, Chair. Because I think we're kind of stuck at a point where we need to entertain a second for his motion and then get comment from the RAC before potentially taking action if there's a second. So let's take I'd recommend a 5-minute break and then we can, that'd be all right?
I feel comfortable doing that.
Okay.
I ask that we take a 5-minute break and hope that Casey is able to get back on the call. I don't feel comfortable, trying to.
Hey, sorry, I'm on. I apologize. Phone died, computer died. I'm here. I don't know what I missed. I ran. I was out moving water. I'm here. Sorry.
All right. It may be necessary to take a break, but if we can get through this, I would rather not. At least at this moment.
Yeah, let's keep going. Now we got Casey, and then we'll get to the other business.
I like it. Casey, when you dropped off, so I don't know if you got there, but the first motion failed for lack of a second because of your substitute motion that you put in. We are now to your motion. Will you please restate what your substitute motion was?
So my substitute motion is to accept the recommendations of the Division of Wildlife Resources and direct the Division of Wildlife Resources to convene a working group that could study how and where guiding could be permitted. So you basically put a 1-year pause consistent with the data points that you've seen, and then sort this out. You know, so my concern, again, I want to be completely transparent and clear. I am comfortable wherever the division and the public comes down on this. Like, I don't have a preconceived notion based on the legislation that I ran that it ends up in any certain way. I'm just concerned that we're unilaterally dismissing out of hand the opinions of what is a significant and statistically significant majority of respondents. So I just don't want to be dismissive of that, because that was the criticisms with running the bill in the first place.
Okay. Oh boy. Okay. Casey's motion is to accept the recommendation of the division concerning. Here we go. Because I'm accepting all of the recommendations and then adding this provision. Okay. Accept the recommendation. Sorry, I'm reading over my scratch. So Casey's proposal to accept the entire recommendation as presented, and to call to convene a working group to come together for this year to ban guiding, and to have a working group come together to discuss guiding in the subsequent year. Is that? Yeah, close enough. All right. Do we have a second for that?
I'll second that.
So we have
this
a
is
second
Randy.
through Randy. Any discussion on the motion before we take a vote?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Junior Goring here.
Yes.
I would amend that motion in all due respect to my good friend Casey and the respect I have for the division. I believe that we could amend that motion by saying, rather than accept the full recommendation, we could amend it to say we will modify the recommendation and allow those guides, because of the short time and the short notice in their preparation, to hunt this year, and then take it up with your committees for your hunt.
So, Mr. Chair, could I ask a question of Junior?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So Junior, I could get there. What if we modified it to say all licensed guides who are licensed prior to 2020 are allowed to guide, and then everybody else is banned?
I didn't think we had any guide license.
Exactly. So what I think that's the point.
That's
right?
a pretty sneaky point, Casey.
But I think that's the point. There's only one that's been following the rules. So if the concern is we're taking away legitimate opportunity, we could allow those who have legitimately entered into the process to move forward, but any other guiding would be banned because they technically shouldn't have been doing it anyway.
So there was guidelines, there was permits issued or available for
not on WMAs, but there are state regulations that need to be followed that have allowed in order for a guide to operate, and those include
but the question here is for the WMAs, is it not?
Those just to clarify, Mr. Chair, our previous discussion, we discussed that those laws do not specifically apply to waterfowl guides and outfitters. Is that correct?
That was
Greg, am I correct there?
I'd like Greg to come on for a second.
I mean, that therein is the problem. You need to give people a chance to comply before you tell them they weren't complying.
Yeah. So the challenge we're having is we don't have a law to enforce currently. And so I think there are sort of broadly accepted and understood best practices out there that one group is following that, but I don't know that we have a specific law or permit that has been obtained by the one operator. Greg, does that sound accurate?
Yeah, that's an accurate summary. And
Okay,
that's the,
so
What
we
would
still have a
happen?
motion, Mr. Chair, we still have a motion by Casey, seconded by Randy.
Yeah.
We did have discussion of a substitute, but
So that's the discussion we're having right now.
but that
before we
substitute
take a
would have to
vote.
be agreed on by the maker of the motion, by Casey, and so we're stuck now on that.
Yes, that's where I'm at. I don't know how else to say it with having Greg there. Do you? I mean, I think everyone on this rack and most people they know exactly who the outfitter is, but I don't know that it would be wise, or if it would not, to state the name of the outfitter that appears in all, to have all the licenses and everything available. I just don't know if we can say that, and that would be Fried Feathers. And I
think it's irrelevant. I mean, most people have not been given the chance to comply.
Then I would not. If there's no nuance within that, then I would just have to say sorry, Junior. I would say that amendment would be. I would just speak in opposition to those proposals.
Okay.
Well, let's go to the amendment then.
I was going to recommend that there are laws in place with the state park. If they were to uphold to the state parks, rules of taking people out, then they would be there. But right now, there's a motion on here. We have a second from Randy. During the discussion, Casey just said that he wouldn't amend it if we couldn't clarify.
Mr. Chairman, you need to clear that. You need
I
to
want to
clear
go to
the
Ben
amendment first.
Let me hear from Ben for 1 second, Junior, and then I'll go to you.
Okay. We need to take a time out procedurally and stop making more business until we handle the business before us.
Well, that's my point. You need to clear the amendment now. The amendment either gets seconded or fails, and then you clear the motion.
Okay. So there was an amendment made. There was a suggestion, but I didn't hear amendment.
There was no amendment made. There was not agreed on by the maker of the motion.
Yes, there was an amendment made. I made the amendment. Now it needs to be seconded. If it's not seconded, it fails.
I'm saying it needs to be supported by the maker of the original motion.
No, it does not. The amendment does not. It needs to be voted on by the congregation, then the main motion gets to be voted on. That's the purpose of an amendment, to change the main motion, whether the maker of the main motion supports it or not.
So let's see. Greg, are you?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm definitely no expert in Robert's rules, and both for the RAC and board process, we tend to try and follow Robert's rules, but we don't follow it it's not a mandatory Robert's rules process. So I can quickly scan Robert's rules, but we're definitely getting far more technical than our RAC and board.
We just continue to bury ourselves into the procedural hole here.
If I can appease Junior, then well, do we have a second for his amendment? Is that, if that's even appropriate? I don't know.
That's the next step.
Why don't we just vote on Casey's amendment? I mean, what Casey proposed was seconded. Let's vote on it, and then if it fails, we'll propose a new amendment.
Yeah, because that would be correct, Darren. That Junior, that you're.
I'll go for that. Let's get her done.
That's what I was suggesting, Darren. Thank you.
Thank you, Junior. All right. I apologize, guys. This is as we're going through these rules, but we do have a motion. I think is everyone clear on the motion? I'm going to call for a vote. This vote would be to ban the guides for this coming year and to put a working group together for subsequent years. We'll begin with Paul Chase.
I'm abstaining.
Abstaining?
Yep.
Okay. Junior.
Nay.
Christopher,
Nay.
Randy,
Yes.
Aaron,
No.
Matt,
No.
Mike,
No.
Kevin. You're on mute. While we're waiting for Kevin, I'll go to Darren,
No.
Kristen,
No.
Casey.
Yes.
Kevin, were you able to get on there? Now his camera's gone as well, but needless to say, the motion fails with or without Kevin's vote. Motion fails. We'll wait for Kevin to come on, but we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 no's, 2 yeses, and Kevin.
Justin, I'm back.
What was your vote on the motion?
Yes.
So we have 3 yeses and 7 no's. Motion fails.
Mr. Chair, can I offer something just real quick that may help, I guess, in this decision?
Yes.
In terms of a permit, if I guess depending on whatever your motion is, but if that's what your motion is approved at the June board meeting, we could probably get anybody a permit that applied before the waterfowl season, if that's the way you want to go. But in terms of a committee, we wouldn't be able to convene a committee and then have any kind of recommendations from them to implement for the upcoming waterfowl season. So I guess that's where we'd be from, depending on whatever happens. Maybe that'll help you with your next motion.
Okay.
This is Matt Clark. I'll take a stab at this now. Speaking specifically and only about the guiding on the WMAs, I would submit a proposal that the guides we implement a rule standard consistent with the DOPL's standard for big game licensing in terms of insurance and et cetera, et cetera. And we allow that for anybody that meets those requirements for this year. Meanwhile, we will form a committee that will look at potentially limiting the number of guys on any specific WMA for future years.
I'll second that motion, Mr. Chairman.
Justin, it still shows us that we're on break. I don't know if it's recording and putting it out or if we need to change anything there.
That's what's showing online, Paul?
Yeah.
Mike Christensen,
I think they just fixed it. It just went off. It just turned off that. So I think we're good.
It wasn't broadcast. It was just in case we went to break.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Michael. You're on mute, Justin. You're on mute.
Sorry. So Matt's motion to require all guides to meet the standards of the big game, the same, would you say the state standards of big game and outfitters licensing?
I would say standards that are consistent with what is required for the big game guys in terms of licenses, insurance, registrations, that sort of thing.
Mike, okay. There is,
and then you had a second from Junior on that motion.
and I had a second from Junior. So this motion pertains to the guiding section and is to require all guides to meet the standards of the same standards of big game and outfitters, and for this year, in order to receive a permit, and call for a working group, correct?
for the next year, not for this year. You don't have time.
For the next year, you're correct.
Yes.
That is correct.
All right. In a second. Do we have any questions about the motion?
This is Aaron. Just a clarifying question. I'm sorry. Matt, would this apply to guides traveling through the WMA?
That's a good question. I'm going to say yes.
So could you amend that motion if you do and see if it's reseconded that they, something to the effect where they could receive a license to guide and travel through the WMA and then everything else that you put in there for this year?
I'm okay with that. I guess I envision that as being a checkbox. Are you going to hunt versus are you just going to be traveling through? But yes, I permit you.
I'll reaffirm the second on that.
Did you confirm your second?
Yes.
All right. I have a question. Blair, Blair has a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify one thing real quick, and that's with Greg Hansen. Greg, is that a good enough definition for what would be required from DOPL? Do we need something more specific from the RAC to?
I think that gives us a pretty good start. There were some of the other state parks provisions as far as transporting passengers for hire that aren't required by DOPL, but if the mover or the maker of the motion would also allow us to fine tune the details, that gets the bulk of what we're after.
This is Matt Clark, and I guess I'm just interested in a starting point here rather than an all-encompassing rule. I would be totally okay amending this motion to give the DWR leeway as long as these rules are consistent across different guiding entities.
Okay. So allowing the DWR the ability to imitate and include state parks restrictions concerning passengers of, carrying passengers on boats. I believe that would cover everything. Is that clear as mud to everyone? You have a second? Does everyone feel comfortable calling for a vote? All right. Paul.
Abstaining again.
Okay. Junior.
Yay. Yes.
Christopher.
Yes.
Randy.
No.
Aaron.
Yes.
Matt.
Yes.
Mike.
Yes.
Kevin.
No.
Darren.
Yes.
Kristen.
Yes.
Casey.
No.
Motion passes. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in favor and 3 against with 1 abstained. So, right. Do we have more discussion about or any other motions with the remainder of this proposal?
We have to get feedback from the no votes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I am sorry. You are correct. Our first note, Randy.
I'm really, really disappointed we're ignoring 60+% of the public on this, going against what they want, kicking the can down the road for a committee to do our job.
Okay. Our other no was Kevin.
Yeah, same reasons as I think that the public has given us their input, and I'm not willing to ignore that.
Okay. And Casey.
Yeah, that's the same for me. Part of the reason that this is in this process is because we wanted to give the public a chance to weigh in. The division did everything we asked of them, gave the public a chance to weigh in, and then made a decision indirect, I would say, contradiction of public sentiment. So,
all right, I respect those answers, and I think that we may hear. I hope that in this there will be we'll be able to find that compromise that I think that would be good, in including everyone. All right, back to the same agenda item number 5. There's still a remainder. All of our questions, everything that we've had, has all been pertaining to guiding. Is there any other questions as far as we're going over I believe that the hunt that we want to add for cranes and the Uinta Basin, and also over the type of shot, and that I believe everything else was in the presentation. Was there any other questions, comments, or concerns with the remainder?
I don't believe I received any commentary on anything other than the guiding. And if there aren't any other comments, I would make a proposal to accept the rest of the proposal as presented.
Have a proposal by Matt to accept.
I second that. Darren seconds that.
Darren? Okay. Any discussion on the motion before we call a vote? All right. If not, Paul?
Yes.
Okay. Junior?
Yes.
Christopher?
Yes.
Randy?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Mike Lauder?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Darren?
Yes.
Kristen?
Yes.
And Casey?
yes.
Motion passes unanimously. All right. On to our next agenda item. It's agenda item number 6. Rule 657-39 electronic meeting rules and amendments by Kyle Maynard. Hopefully everyone had the opportunity to watch this and what he had to say. Turn some time over to Ben to be able to give us what the public feedback was on this.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Do you want to ask the committee if they need a break? We've been at it for 2.5 hours, going to be going on 3 hours here in a little bit. I'm happy to plow through if that's what the committee wants to do.
I can ask that. I do anticipate that the rest of this goes quickly, but if there's concerns, would anyone like a break?
Okay, we'll plow through, it looks like. So we had 8 people respond to this question. There was one person that was somewhat disagree, one person strongly disagree, and then the rest were evenly split 2 apiece between strongly agree, somewhat agree, and neither agree nor disagree. The only comments that we got about this item were one, that they want to make sure that the electronic opportunities to electronically comment are preserved. They had also wished that in our hybrid form that we will entertain live electronic comments. And the other comment was that just that we maintain live streaming of the meetings so that people can watch remotely. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you. Do we have any questions about this, about the presentation or what's been brought up? Any comments?
So we had some discussion about this at the Wildlife Board Nominating Committee. This is prior to this being proposed to the RACs. And so my understanding is that we're going to keep the format that we're doing now when we go back live. So we're still not going to sit through the presentations at the live meeting. Those will be online. There'll be electronic comments. before a deadline, and then the live meeting will happen, and there will still be live comments at the live meeting. I'm generally in support of that. I think it's really been beneficial to have everybody have the ability to watch the presentations prior to the meeting, and I'm supportive of it.
Yeah, I don't think we know the final format of what our hybrid will be, but I think the intention is for us to preserve the good and ditch the necessary due to the pandemic. So I think we can all agree that it has saved us a lot of time and efficiency not to have the presentations day of, but people want to be able to comment live, and people have liked being able to submit comments electronically prior to the meeting and have access to the presentations prior. So when we talk about a hybrid, I think we're talking about a mashup of kind of the good things that we've learned from this while going back to the good things that we were able to do before the pandemic, with live meetings in an anchor location, allowing comments to happen live in person, accepting the electronic feedback prior, and putting the presentations out prior, still being able to stream the meetings live as well so that people can track on the meeting remotely. That's kind of, I think, the estimated model we're looking for.
Kyle, do you have something about that you could share with us?
Yeah. I just wanted to reiterate that what Ben is saying, that the goal is a hybrid model, but the discussions and planning is still ongoing. The division's working on a protocol, and that'll be brought to you at a later date to have a more in-depth discussion about that. The edits that we're talking about today are just setting the goal to have the most flexibility to what that protocol could be, as far as the Open and Public Meetings Act goes. So it adds the RAC to the electronic meetings provision so that you can have an anchor location, which it wasn't there previously. And it just adds to the notice requirement that we define a place for electronic comments. So really what we're talking about today is changing the rule to allow for any sort of option to allow the most amount of participation down the road.
Okay. I would just say that I think it's quite amazing what's taken place over this year, considering what we've gone through. I applaud the division with the short amount of time when this pandemic hit to be able to put together a system that the public process could continue, albeit there are some things that we're definitely missing. The ability, I think tonight's discussion would have been interesting, and I think would have been easier for all of us to make an informed decision had we had the opportunity to have live comments in there, and for others who were listening, it's hard for those who are watching this right now to not receive the 130 something, or I don't even remember the exact number of emails, or to hear other comments. There were many times where public comments really answered questions that I had or brought questions up that I didn't think of before. And so I look forward to being able to get back to have the public comment be live where others can hear it. Now, we are able to hear most of that comment, but other general public aren't able to hear their peers or their fellow sportsmen. And I look forward to, hopefully, and by the time our next RAC meeting goes, I'm hoping that there's a chance that we are able to meet live and begin this hybrid process. But with that, do we have any other questions or comments? Not, I'd entertain a motion.
Can I make a motion that we just accept that as proposed by the division?
Yeah, so I have a motion from Darren to accept the proposal as presented.
I'll second that. This is Randy.
Randy? All right. Any discussion on the motion before we call the vote? All right, I'll call for a vote. Paul Chase.
Yes.
Junior Gordon.
Yes.
Christopher Hogstrom.
Yes.
Randy Hutchinson.
Yes.
Aaron Johnson.
Yes.
Matt Clark.
Yes.
Kevin McLeod.
Yes.
Mike Lauder, I skipped you.
Yes.
Darren Perry,
Yes.
Kristen Purdy,
Yes.
Casey Snyder.
Yes.
All right. The last thing that we had was just motion passes unanimously. I apologize. The last thing that we have was a regional presentation about the Hat Island and Millville-Providence WMAs. These were presented by John Neill and Pam Kramer. They were informational, not something that we'll be voting on at this time. But does anyone have any questions or comments, for either John or Pam?
I'll just comment to John that I like the changes that you're making, and I think that will help improve that area tremendously. So appreciate the work.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Any other questions or comments? I just realized I have 10% of battery left on my device, so I guess I got a charger right here though. Any other, if there's no other questions or any other thing, I would just like to take a minute once again to thank all of our RAC members. This has been a hot topic item, difficult. I hope that we're able to, that the Wildlife Board will take our recommendations, take into consider this as well as the other RACs. I feel like, that we could recognize, and we did our best to recognize those who did go through the poll and do that 60%, but also, in trying to find solutions, without a drastic thing. Now, I know I really respect the three individuals that voted against and what they have to say, and I think those are very valid reasons for voting no on the proposal about guides. But I want to thank everyone. Again, this is the most feedback we've ever received, emails or anything in the 6 years that I've been there, and it makes for difficult discussions. And I applaud everyone and thank everyone for the time. Many phone calls and a lot. Yes.
Can I ask Blair one question that I needed to ask before we leave?
If Blair is on there, if we could ask a quick question, then yes, that'd be fine. Blair, are you there?
Maybe he's gone.
I'll
give him a call, Justin.
I would suggest that you call and talk to him and others. Know that they're always available. All of our WMA managers, all of our division employees are always there, and I hope that we're making phone calls to them prior to our meetings to have questions or clarifications. With no other items on the agenda, once again, we want to thank Aaron Johnson, Kristen Purdy, and Christopher Hoekstrom for their time on the RAC, and we're very grateful for the time and effort they put in. There was some confusion. I got a couple texts after we talked about this coming, that we will be up for having, it is possible that we could have a new chair of this committee after today, probably in my maybe not so good job. Maybe there'll be some more people say, let's get that guy out. Please, if you have the desire, or if you think of someone doing a good job, to please reach out to Ben. And then when it comes time for the meeting, also we make a motion. So anyway, with that being said, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting.
So moved.
We have a motion by Kevin to adjourn for tonight's meeting.
I'll second it.
A second from Paul. If you're against it, say something. If not, I think we'll end the meeting at this time. All right. Thanks again, everyone. We appreciate your participation.
Thank you, Justin. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, guys.